In the quiet corners of Dragon Ball Super's timeline, after gods clashed and universes trembled, a different kind of story began to unfold. The Granolah Arc arrived not with the familiar roar of Super Saiyans, but with whispers of forgotten histories and debts unpaid across the cosmos. It was a saga that asked what it truly meant to be the strongest, and whether strength alone could ever heal the wounds carried across lifetimes. Before you drift into sleep, you're welcome to subscribe for more calm Dragon Ball stories. And if you feel like it, tell me where you're listening from tonight, letting these memories carry you gently into what came after Moro's defeat, when the universe thought it had finally found peace. The arc emerged in December of 2020, serialized in V-Jump magazine under Toyotaro's careful pen, with Akira Toriyama guiding each narrative choice from behind the scenes. It represented the 74th through the 87th chapters of the Dragon Ball Super manga, unfolding over nearly 3 years of monthly releases. This meant readers experienced Granola's journey slowly, letting each revelation settle before the next arrived. The publication schedule gave the story room to breathe in ways the anime never could. Each chapter landed once per month, creating natural pauses where fans could discuss theories and digest what they'd learned. Toyotaro worked closely with Toriyama during this period, refining character designs and plot points through multiple drafts before finalizing each installment. The manga format allowed for quieter moments that might have been rushed in animated form. Panels lingered on facial expressions, on the weight of memories, on the silence between battles. The pacing reflected a deliberate choice to explore trauma and revenge, with more nuance than Dragon Ball typically afforded its antagonists. Granola himself emerged as Universe 7's last surviving Cerealian, a species nearly erased 40 years before the main events of the story. His name came from the English word granola, following Dragon Ball's long tradition of food-based naming conventions. Toriyama specifically chose this because Cerealians were meant to evoke cereal as well, creating a thematic connection. The character's design went through 7 major revisions before Toyotaro and Toriyama settled on his final appearance. Early sketches showed him with longer hair and more traditional Saiyan-like features, but they shifted towards something more unique to separate him visually from Goku and Vegeta. His signature eye patch and long crimson hair became defining traits. Granola's right eye, hidden beneath that patch, held special significance to the narrative. The eye wasn't missing or damaged, but rather enhanced, capable of perceiving weak points in any opponent's body or technique. This ability connected to his people's evolutionary history as a species that valued precision over raw power. His weapon of choice, a ray gun that seemed almost comically outdated in a universe of energy blasts, actually utilized incredibly advanced Serelian technology. The gun could channel his own Ki through focusing crystals, allowing for attacks that rivaled even godly techniques and raw destructive potential. Oatmeal, his artificial intelligence companion, calculated trajectories and weak points in real time. Oatmeal's name derived from oatmeal, continuing the breakfast food theme established with Granola's name. The AI manifested as a small device worn on Granola's left eye, providing tactical analysis and functioning as a targeting computer. Originally, Oatmeal belonged to Granolah's mother, who used it for peaceful surveying work before the Saiyan invasion. The bond between Granola and Oatmeal reflected one of the arc's quieter themes about companionship and memory. Oatmeal retained recordings of Granola's mother's voice, of Cerealian lullabies, of a civilization that no longer existed. Sometimes Granolah would play these recordings late at night, though he never admitted this to anyone. Monaito, the elderly Namekian who raised Granolah after the genocide, represented another thread connecting this story to Dragon Ball's broader mythology. He was one of the Namekians who fled to various planets long before the Namekian race's own near extinction. His presence on planet Cereal was initially coincidental, arriving there approximately 70 years before the Saiyan attack. Monaito's healing abilities, though modest compared to Dende's or other Dragon Clan Namekians, proved crucial throughout the arc's final battles. His powers had atrophied somewhat over decades of isolation, rarely needed on a planet that had known mostly peace. The emotional weight of healing Granola's wounds repeatedly while watching the young Serelian destroy himself for revenge added tragedy to their relationship. The Namekian's age was never precisely stated, but contextual clues suggested he was at least 400 years old, making him one of the oldest living Namekians outside of Grand Elder Guru's lineage. His memories stretched back across centuries, witnessing the rise and fall of countless civilizations across Universe 7. Monaito guarded planet Serial's set of Dragon Balls, smaller and less powerful than Earth's, but still capable of granting wishes. These Cerealian Dragon Balls could only grant one wish per summoning instead of 3, and the wish had more limited scope than Shenron's capabilities. They were created by Toranbo, a dragon god who manifested as a massive serpentine figure when summoned. Toranbo's design evoked traditional Eastern dragons more explicitly than Shenron, with a longer, more serpentine body and whiskers that trailed back like flowing water. The dragon spoke in an archaic dialect that even Oatmeal struggled to translate fully, suggesting the balls were created long before the current galactic common language evolved. The Cerealian Dragon Balls scattered across the planet's rebuilt surface, hidden among the settlements that had grown in the 40 years since the genocide. Finding them required knowledge of old Cerealian cultural sites, places Granola remembered from childhood before everything burned. Each ball held significance to locations that no longer existed, marking graves of memory. When Granola made his wish to become the strongest warrior in the universe, the specific wording carried enormous narrative weight. He didn't wish to be the most powerful or to have unlimited strength, but to be the strongest. This specificity meant Toronto granted him power exactly one increment above whoever currently held that title. The cost of this wish, revealed gradually through the arc, involved exchanging his remaining lifespan for immediate power. Granola had roughly 200 years of natural life remaining as a Cerealian, and the wish compressed all the growth, training, and evolution he would have achieved across those centuries into a single moment. He aged 3 years instantly, leaving him with only 3 years to live. This transformation fundamentally altered Granola's body at the cellular level. His muscles didn't bulk up dramatically, but their density increased exponentially. His nervous system evolved to process information at speeds that would have taken lifetimes of meditation to achieve. His ki control reached levels that Goku and Vegeta had worked decades to approach. The wish also unlocked his Serelian right eye's full potential. What was once a useful targeting tool became something approaching precognition, allowing Granola to perceive not just weak points, but the flow of causality itself in combat. He could see where an opponent would move before they knew themselves, anticipating the chain of muscle contractions and energy movements. Still, the wish contained an inherent limitation that became the arc's central dramatic irony. Granola wished to be the strongest in the universe, but the universe contained Beerus, Whis, and the Angels, beings who existed on planes beyond mortal warriors. Toronbo interpreted universe as mortal fighters only, excluding gods and angels from the calculation. This meant Granola's power was calibrated to surpass Goku's Ultra Instinct and Vegeta's Ultra Ego by the smallest possible margin, just enough to claim the title. The mathematical precision of this scaling meant that as Goku and Vegeta grew stronger during their battles with Granola, he unconsciously grew as well, maintaining his slight edge through combat evolution. The revelation about Gas, the youngest Heater's sibling who received an identical wish shortly after Granola's, added another layer to this power system. When Elec wished for Gas to become the strongest, it overrode Granola's wish, making the Cerealian the second strongest instead. This demotion happened instantly regardless of distance, showing the Dragon Ball's reality warping authority. Gas represented perhaps the arc's most tragic figure, despite being its primary antagonist for much of the runtime. He was the muscle of the Heaters organization, a family of information brokers who manipulated galactic events from the shadows. His relationship with his older brother Elec defined much of his character, built on loyalty that bordered on complete subservience. The Heaters as a group consisted of 4 siblings: Elec, oil, maki, and gas, each named after fuel sources following Dragon Ball's theming traditions. Elec, the eldest, orchestrated their operations with cold calculation, viewing even his siblings as assets to be deployed. Oil and Maki occupied middle positions, more compassionate than Elec, but still complicit in his schemes. Gas's appearance marked him as different from typical Dragon Ball antagonists, tall and slender rather than bulky, with wild dark hair and a somber expression. He looked perpetually exhausted even before the wish drained his life force. His combat style emphasized weaponry, manifesting various tools through his psychic abilities rather than relying purely on energy blasts. This weapon materialization ability, which Gas could use to create axes, spears, swords, and even more exotic armaments from thin air, connected to his telekinetic powers. He essentially condensed ambient energy into physical forms, limited only by his imagination and power level. The weapons weren't truly solid matter but hyper-dense energy constructs. Before receiving his wish, Gas was already formidable, strong enough to battle Granola evenly despite the latter's enhanced state. This established Gas's natural talent as a warrior, someone who had spent his life honing combat skills even while serving as his brother's enforcer. The wish merely amplified existing capabilities rather than granting entirely new ones. The cost Gas paid mirrored Granola's sacrifice, but with a crucial difference. Gas had fewer years remaining naturally, perhaps 150 compared to Granola's 200. When those years compressed into immediate power, he aged approximately 5 years instantly, leaving him with only around 5 years of life left, though the exact math remained deliberately vague. As Gas burned through his remaining lifespan in combat, his aging accelerated visually. His hair grayed, then whitened. Lines appeared on his face, deepening with each transformation and power surge. By the final battle, he resembled a man in his 80s despite being chronologically in his 30s, a walking corpse powered by Elec's ambition. The psychological impact of knowing his death approached imminently affected Gas's fighting style. He became more reckless, more willing to take damage, because survival no longer mattered. This made him paradoxically more dangerous, removing the self-preservation instinct that causes most fighters to defend themselves. Elec's manipulation of Gas throughout the arc exposed the darkness in their family dynamic. The eldest brother had spent decades conditioning Gas to obey without question, framing this obedience as love and loyalty. When Elec revealed he'd sacrificed Gas's lifespan for power, he showed no remorse, only irritation that Gas wasn't killing their enemies faster. The Heater's history with the Saiyans and Frieza Force dated back 4 decades to planet Serial's invasion. They had collaborated with Frieza's army, providing intelligence about Serelian settlements in exchange for a cut of the planet's eventual sale price. This made them directly complicit in the genocide that orphaned Granola. Bardock, Goku's father, appeared in this arc through extended flashbacks that added crucial context to both the Cerealian massacre and the Heater's involvement. These sequences revealed Bardock's presence on planet Serial during the attack, showing a side of the Saiyan warrior that complicated his legacy. He wasn't there as a hero, but as part of the invasion force. The flashbacks depicted Bardock as younger than his appearance in the Father of Goku special, still developing the conscience that would eventually lead him to defy the Saiyan race's purpose. He wore different armor, an earlier model that predated his iconic blood-stained outfit, suggesting these events occurred years before Goku's birth. Moneto's interactions with Bardock during the invasion formed the emotional core of these flashback sequences. The Namekian had found an injured Bardock after a skirmish with a particularly powerful Cerealian defender and chose to heal him despite knowing what the Saiyans were doing to the planet. This decision would ripple forward 40 years. In return for the healing, Bardock saved Moneto and infant Granola from another Saiyan, one whose face bore a distinctive scar and particularly cruel disposition. This Saiyan had transformed into his great ape form and was systematically destroying the shelter where Serelian survivors huddled. Bardock intervened not from heroism but from a debt to Moneito. The battle between Bardock and this scarred Saiyan later revealed to be named Crab, showcased both warriors in their great ape transformations under Serial's full moon. Two massive beasts crashed through architecture that had stood for centuries, reducing cultural monuments to rubble, while a terrified Namekian and infant watched from hiding. Bardock's victory came at significant cost. He took injuries that would have killed most warriors, crushed under Crab's greater size and berserker rage. Only Monaito's healing intervention saved him, though the Namekian's powers weren't strong enough to fully restore him. Bardock left planet Serial permanently scarred, including a wound across his cheek that would remain for life. Before departing, Bardock entrusted his scouter to Monaito, asking the Namekian to keep it safe. This scouter, which would eventually pass to Granola, became a symbolic link between Goku's father and the orphaned Cerealian. It had recorded audio from Bardock's final words to Monaito about protecting the child no matter what. The revelation that Bardock saved Granola's life fundamentally challenged the Cerelian's entire worldview and quest for revenge. He had spent 40 years hating all Saiyans for what they took from him, never knowing that a Saiyan was also the reason he survived. This knowledge didn't erase the pain but complicated it beyond simple vengeance. Granola's mother, glimpsed only briefly in fragmented flashbacks, had been a surveyor who mapped planet Serial's ecosystem using the AI that became Oatmeal. She sang to infant Granola in Cerealian, a language that went extinct with her death. The melody survived in Oatmeal's memory banks, occasionally playing when Granola's emotional state destabilized. The Cerealian race before their destruction had numbered approximately 30 million individuals spread across 3 continents on their homeworld. They were not a warrior culture, but explorers and archivists, cataloging knowledge from across their sector of Universe 7. Their technology focused on precision instruments and long-range observation rather than weapons. Physically, Cerealians resembled humans closely enough that Granola could pass for one at a glance, but their enhanced right eye marked them as distinct. This eye evolved over millions of years as their ancestors hunted small, fast-moving prey in dense forests, developing the ability to track minute movements and predict trajectories instinctively. The Serelian written language, preserved only in fragments on ruins scattered across the planet's rebuilt surface, used flowing curved characters that spiraled outward from central points. Scholars from other civilizations found it beautiful but almost impossible to translate without a native speaker, and Granola was the last who could read it fluently. Before the Saiyans came, planet Serial's economy centered on information exchange and cultural preservation. They maintained libraries that housed knowledge from 1,000 dead civilizations, serving as the universe's memory. When Frieza's forces chose the planet for conquest, they specifically wanted to sell this accumulated wisdom to the highest bidder, the Sugarians, an insectoid species that purchased planet Serial after the Cerealian genocide, transformed it into a manufacturing hub. They built cities designed for their anatomy rather than humanoid inhabitants, creating architecture that looked organic and hive-like. These structures still stood during the main timeline, housing the few Cerealians who survived the invasion. Most Cerealian survivors numbered fewer than 50 individuals scattered across the galaxy, many having fled off-world before the invasion reached critical mass. They lived in hiding, terrified that admitting their heritage would draw attention from Frieza Force remnants. Some had children with other species, diluting their bloodline to avoid detection. Granola knew of perhaps a dozen other survivors, though he'd lost contact with most over the years. They formed no community, shared no solidarity, each believing survival meant staying isolated and invisible. This loneliness fed Granola's obsession with revenge, having no cultural anchors to ground him. The Heaters employed Granola as a bounty hunter, deliberately keeping him unaware of their role in his people's destruction. They fed him targets, collected their percentages, and let him risk his life repeatedly while accumulating wealth they never shared fairly. Oil and Maki felt some guilt about this exploitation, but Alec viewed it as simply good business. Granola's ship, a sleek vessel modified for solo operation, contained living quarters barely large enough for sleeping. He owned few possessions beyond his weapons, some Cerealian artifacts saved from ruins, and the clothes he wore. The ship's computer had Oatmeal's backup data, ensuring the AI could transfer between devices if needed. Most missions involved tracking down criminals who'd fled Galactic Patrol jurisdiction, though Granolah took particular satisfaction in hunting former Frieza Force soldiers. Over 15 years as a bounty hunter, he'd captured or killed approximately 300 targets, building a reputation for never losing a mark once he'd accepted the contract. His tactics emphasized stealth and precision over direct confrontation. Granolah would spend days or even weeks observing a target, learning their patterns, identifying moments of vulnerability. When he finally struck, it was often over in seconds, a single precise shot to incapacitate or kill before the target knew danger had arrived. This methodology reflected Serelian hunting traditions adapted to bounty work. His people had been patient watchers, content to observe for as long as necessary to ensure success. Granolah inherited this patience, despite his burning need for revenge, creating an interesting tension in his character between calculated planning and emotional volatility. The 7-3 unit that triggered the Arc's events was officially designated OG-73, a prototype android created by the now-destroyed Heater's operative named Magenta. It could copy the abilities of anyone it touched, storing them indefinitely and using them in combat. The Galactic Patrol had supposedly destroyed it along with Moro. However, a fragment of 7-3's crystalline core survived, eventually recovered by Heater's operatives, who'd monitored the battle's aftermath. This fragment retained all the copied abilities, including data from Moro himself, making it extraordinarily valuable for reverse engineering. The Heaters spent months extracting and duplicating this information. From 7-3's core data, they manufactured an army of OG soldiers, inferior copies that possessed only a fraction of the original's capabilities, but were nonetheless formidable fighters. Each unit could copy 1 or 2 abilities instead of 7-3's unlimited capacity, but this limitation made them cheaper to produce and easier to control. Granola's assault on the Heater's base to steal the original 7-3 comprised the Arc's opening action sequence. He infiltrated their stronghold alone, fighting through waves of OG soldiers while searching for the genuine article among the duplicates. His strategy involved systematically destroying each copy until only the original remained. The base itself existed on a remote asteroid at the edge of inhabited space, deliberately chosen for its isolation and defensibility. The Heaters had hollowed out the asteroid's interior, creating a fortress with multiple layers of security and escape routes. Granolah bypassed most of these through careful planning and Oatmeal's hacking capabilities. When Granolah finally located the real 7-3, sealed in a stasis chamber to prevent it from activating independently, he experienced a moment of hesitation. The android represented Moro's legacy, a being that had threatened to destroy the entire galaxy. Part of him wondered if stealing it might endanger everyone, but his need for the bounty payment overrode these concerns. The payment from this job gave Granolah enough funds to seriously consider retiring from bounty hunting, perhaps finally searching for other Serelian survivors or attempting to rebuild some fragment of his culture. Instead, he chose to use the money maintaining his ship and equipment, unable to imagine a life beyond hunting. If you're still awake halfway through, maybe subscribe before you drift off, and tell me what time it is where you're watching from. Upon learning about Frieza's resurrection, Granolah's psychological state deteriorated rapidly. The tyrant's death at Goku's hands years earlier had robbed him of his primary revenge target, leaving his hatred directionless. Knowing Frieza lived again reawakened every buried trauma, every nightmare about the day his world burned. His confrontation with Elec about Frieza's location revealed how little control the Heaters actually had over Granolah's actions. They'd always assumed his dependence on their contracts kept him compliant, but revenge mattered more than money or security. When Elec refused to provide coordinates, Granolah nearly attacked him before Gas intervened. Gas's initial appearance in the arc established him as significantly stronger than Granola at this point in the timeline. He effortlessly subdued the Cerealian despite the latter's skills, demonstrating both superior power and technical mastery. This humiliation drove Granola toward his fateful wish, needing strength that no amount of training could provide in time. The philosophical debate between Granola and Monaito about using the Dragon Balls for revenge formed one of the arc's most emotionally resonant sequences. The elderly Namekian understood vengeance's emptiness from centuries of observation, watching countless civilizations destroy themselves chasing retribution. He begged Granola to choose differently, to honor his mother's memory through building rather than destroying. Granola's counter-argument centered on justice rather than simple revenge. He framed his quest as ensuring Frieza and all Saiyans faced consequences for genocide, preventing them from destroying other civilizations. This rationalization let him feel morally justified, though Monaito saw through it to the pain beneath. When Granola spoke the wish aloud to Torombo, his exact words were, "I want to become the strongest warrior in the universe," not "I want power to defeat Frieza," or "I want to protect others," but simply to be strongest. This revealed the truth beneath his justifications. He felt powerless, and strength itself was the goal beyond any particular application. The transformation itself happened gradually rather than explosively. Granola didn't power up with a dramatic aura or scream. Instead, his body temperature rose slightly, his muscles refined their structure, and his mind expanded to comprehend fighting concepts that would have seemed impossible moments before. He felt the change as a settling rather than an eruption. Oatmeal immediately detected the 3-year lifespan remaining and reported this to Granola, who processed the information with disturbing calm. 3 years felt like enough time to kill Frieza, destroy any remaining Saiyans, and die satisfied. He didn't consider what he might want to do afterward, what experiences he was surrendering, whether revenge was truly worth his remaining time. Monaito's anguish at witnessing this choice added weight to the scene. He had saved Granola as an infant, raised him through childhood, taught him to survive and hope despite everything lost. Watching the boy he'd nurtured deliberately throw away his future for revenge felt like a personal failure, like Monaito's decades of care had meant nothing. The arc then shifted perspective to Beerus's planet, where Goku and Vegeta continued their training under Whis and Beerus respectively. This juxtaposition between Granola's shortcut to power and the Saiyan's gradual cultivation highlighted one of the story's central themes, the value of the journey versus the destination. Goku's Ultra Instinct mastery had progressed significantly since the Tournament of Power and Moro battles. He could now activate the transformation at will, rather than only under extreme duress, and maintain it for extended periods without the stamina drain that plagued earlier uses. His silver hair and serene expression had become familiar sights during training. However, Whis emphasized that simply accessing Ultra Instinct wasn't enough. The technique required developing a personalized version that reflected the user's individual nature, rather than just copying the angel's methodology. Goku needed to discover his own path within the form, making it truly his rather than borrowed power. This guidance paralleled the lesson Whis had given Goku and Vegeta years earlier about their respective weaknesses. Goku's tendency to drop his guard when relaxed, Vegeta's tendency to overthink. Now Whis was pushing them beyond correcting weaknesses toward expressing strengths through divine techniques. Vegeta's training with Beerus took a different direction entirely. The Destroyer God offered to teach him Ultra Ego, the Gods of Destruction's signature technique that served as a counterpoint to the Angel's Ultra Instinct. Where Ultra Instinct required complete mental stillness, Ultra Ego demanded embracing emotion and desire for combat. The name Ultra Ego deliberately mirrored Ultra Instinct while suggesting opposite philosophical foundations. Instinct worked by eliminating the self, letting the body move independently of thought or feeling. Ego worked by amplifying the self, making the user's fighting spirit and aggressive will the source of power. Beerus explained that Ultra Ego grew stronger through taking damage and pushing through pain, feeding on destruction itself to increase power exponentially. The more a user was hurt, the more they wanted to hurt their opponent, creating a feedback loop of escalating violence. This made it particularly dangerous for someone like Vegeta, whose Saiyan nature already inclined toward battle lust. Vegeta's enthusiasm for this technique stemmed partly from his desire to surpass Goku on his own terms rather than simply chasing the same transformation. If Goku mastered Ultra Instinct, Vegeta would master something entirely different but equally godly. Their rivalry could continue on parallel paths, rather than one constantly trailing the other. The visual distinction between the forms emphasized their philosophical differences. Ultra Instinct's silver hair and calm expression contrasted sharply with Ultra Ego's purple aura and Vegeta's savage grin while using it. One looked serene, the other looked thrilled by violence, reflecting angelic detachment versus destructive passion. Beerus clarified that while he would teach Vegeta the basics of Ultra Ego, the Saiyan would need to develop his own mastery through combat experience. Gods of destruction learned their power through countless battles across millennia, destroying planets and civilizations while honing their technique. Vegeta had to condense this learning into a much shorter time frame. The Oracle Fish's insomnia, mentioned briefly in this section, served as ominous foreshadowing. Oracle Fish slept fitfully when major cosmic events approached, their prophetic abilities manifesting as restless dreams. Whis' attempt to medicate the fish suggested even he felt concerned about what might be coming. When Goku casually hoped someone strong would appear for him to fight, Beerus' irritated response carried real frustration born from experience. Every time powerful enemies appeared, Beerus inevitably got dragged into the conflict despite preferring destruction on his own schedule. Goku's battle addiction created work for everyone around him. The training sequence showing Goku splitting into multiple images demonstrated his advanced understanding of Ultra Instinct's possibilities. He could now use the heightened state to perform techniques that would normally require intense concentration while maintaining the form's trademark thoughtless movement. This represented significant growth from his first incomplete uses during the Tournament of Power. Whis easily countering all of Goku's images and kicking him back to the ground illustrated the vast gap that still existed between mortal mastery and angelic nature. Whis didn't use Ultra Instinct, he simply existed in it perpetually, as natural as breathing. Reaching that level would take Goku far longer than any remaining lifespan. The mention of the Grand Priest surpassing even Whis in Ultra Instinct mastery established a hierarchy that extended beyond anything Goku or Vegeta might achieve in their lifetimes. It suggested that even if they perfected these godly techniques, they'd still be operating at the lowest rungs of a ladder, stretching impossibly high. Vegeta's declaration that he wouldn't pursue Ultra Instinct at all surprised even Beerus. Most warriors would eagerly learn any technique that granted godly power, but Vegeta recognized that copying Goku's path would always leave him second. Better to forge something uniquely his own, even if it meant harder, riskier development. This decision reflected character growth spanning decades. The Vegeta who first encountered Goku on Earth would have desperately sought any edge, any shortcut, copying whatever techniques his rival developed. This older, wiser Vegeta understood that authentic strength came from authentic paths, not mimicry. Back on planet Cereal, Granola's post-Wish existence brought both exhilaration and emptiness. He possessed power beyond imagination, could sense energy across the entire planet, perceived reality's underlying structure in ways that left him dizzy. Yet the hollowness remained, because strength alone couldn't resurrect the dead or restore lost time. His first test of the new power came when he effortlessly defeated a group of space pirates who'd been terrorizing Cereal's Shugerian inhabitants. Battles that would have required careful planning now ended with casual gestures. Granolah barely moved, yet his opponents crumpled as if struck by invisible hammers, their bodies unable to withstand his presence. The Shugerian citizens who witnessed this intervention reacted with fear rather than gratitude, backing away from Granola as if he were a natural disaster that might turn on them next. This response stung more than he expected, reminding him that power commanded respect through intimidation, not affection or admiration. Monaito watched these displays with increasing sadness. He saw Granola becoming exactly what he'd sworn to destroy, a being whose first response to any problem was overwhelming violence. The wish had granted strength, but accelerated the erosion of the gentle child Monaito remembered from decades ago. When the Heaters learned about Granola's wish through their information network, Alec immediately recognized both threat and opportunity. A Granola this powerful could no longer be controlled through contracts or manipulation. He would need to be eliminated or made irrelevant through an even greater power. Alec's decision to use their own Dragon Ball wish to make Gas the strongest reflected his cold pragmatism. He didn't hesitate despite knowing it would cost his younger brother's lifespan, viewing Gas as a tool that needed upgrading. The fact that Oil and Maki protested, however weakly, suggested even they found this calculation too heartless. Gas's reaction to learning he would receive the wish mixed excitement with resignation. He'd spent his entire life following Alec's orders, believing this obedience proved his love and loyalty. Being chosen for this ultimate enhancement felt like validation, even as some part of him understood it meant death. The actual wishing scene with Gas paralleled Granola's, but with crucial differences in framing. Where Granola made his wish desperately, independently, Gas received his as a gift that was simultaneously a command. Alec controlled every aspect, from the wording to the timing, reducing Gas to a vessel for someone else's ambition. Tarombo's response to granting two strongest in the universe wishes in quick succession was never explicitly addressed, but presumably the dragon god simply updated the designation each time. Recalibrating cosmic power levels accordingly, the wishes didn't conflict because they occurred sequentially, each superseding the previous. Gas's transformation appeared more violent than Granola's, perhaps because he had less natural potential to build from, or perhaps because the force nature made his body resist. He convulsed, screamed, aged rapidly through several years and moments. When it ended, he stood taller, more muscular, eyes hollow with the knowledge of his approaching death. The plan Alec concocted involved using Gas to eliminate Granola, then having Granola's defeat blamed on Goku and Vegeta, whom Alec had learned were training nearby in Universe 7. This would serve multiple purposes, removing threats, sowing discord among potential enemies, and positioning the Heaters as the power behind cosmic events. To lure Goku and Vegeta to planet Serial, Alec fabricated intelligence, suggesting Frieza himself would appear there, knowing the Saiyans' history with the tyrant would guarantee their arrival. The manipulation worked perfectly, with Whis agreeing to transport them based on this false information. Goku and Vegeta's arrival on planet Serial marked the first time they'd visited this world, though technically Goku's father had fought there 4 decades prior. Neither Saiyan knew this history, seeing the planet as just another location where enemies might appear, not a place soaked in their race's sins. Their first encounter with Granola began with a case of mistaken identity, the Cerealian seeing Goku and immediately recognizing Saiyan features identical to those who'd destroyed his world. The resemblance to the attackers from his childhood, particularly to Bardock himself, triggered Granola's trauma responses instantly. Granola attacked without warning or conversation, his enhanced eye identifying Goku's weak points before the Saiyan even registered danger. The first shot grazed Goku's shoulder, a precise strike that would have killed instantly if Goku's instincts hadn't moved him fractionally aside. Even Ultra Instinct barely kept pace with Granola's evolved perception. The initial battle between Granola and Goku showcased the Cerelian's unique fighting style. He didn't rely on overwhelming energy blasts or flashy transformations, but on surgical precision, targeting pressure points, joints, anywhere that would disable rather than simply damage. His gun's shots curved through the air following trajectories Goku couldn't predict, Goku's confusion about why this stranger attacked him so viciously became its own obstacle. He kept trying to talk, to ask questions, to understand the situation, which created openings Granola ruthlessly exploited. Ultra Instinct worked best when Goku embraced combat fully, but his good nature resisted fighting someone whose motivation he couldn't grasp. Vegeta's intervention shifted the battle's dynamics, giving Goku space to breathe and reassess. The Saiyan prince recognized Granola's species from ancient Saiyan records, though he'd never seen a Cerealian before. His knowledge about their genocide came from archived mission reports he'd studied during his time serving under Frieza. When Vegeta revealed that Saiyans had indeed destroyed planet Cereal decades ago, Goku's horror and guilt manifested visibly. He understood intellectually that his race had committed atrocities, but confronting a survivor, someone with every reason to hate him personally for sins he never committed, made that history devastatingly immediate. Granola's response to Vegeta's admission was not satisfaction, but intensified rage. Hearing a Saiyan casually acknowledge the genocide as historical fact, as something they'd simply moved past while he suffered every single day, made their existence feel like an insult to everything he'd lost. The battle escalated as Granola's power forced both Saiyans into their strongest forms. Goku activated Ultra Instinct, hair-shifting silver, expression going serene. Vegeta triggered Ultra Ego for what might have been the first time in actual combat rather than training, purple aura crackling around him as his fighting instincts sharpened toward gleeful violence. The contrast between the Saiyan's transformations mid-battle fascinated Granola despite his rage. Goku moved with impossible grace, dodging attacks that should have connected, body flowing like water around obstacles. Vegeta, conversely, deliberately took hits, letting Granola's shots pierce his defenses while grinning maniacally, power visibly increasing with each wound. Granola's enhanced eye allowed him to perceive the fundamental difference between these techniques. Ultra Instinct separated body from mind, creating a void where conscious thought normally resided. Ultra Ego did the opposite, flooding every cell with concentrated ego and will. Both achieved transcendent power through opposite paths. Despite these transformations, Granola maintained his edge through the vicious mechanics. Each time Goku or Vegeta grew slightly stronger through combat evolution, Granola's power adjusted upward proportionally, keeping him perpetually ahead. The gap never widened, but it never closed either, creating a frustrating stalemate. Oatmeal's analysis during the fight identified the strange phenomenon, noting that Granola's energy readings kept fluctuating upward in direct correlation to the Saiyan's increases. The AI couldn't explain this mathematically as it violated conventional understanding of power levels and growth patterns. This mystery would only make sense later. The destruction their battle caused across Cereal's landscape created another layer of tragedy. Rebuilt cities that had taken 40 years to construct crumbled in minutes, Shugarian civilians fleeing in terror as gods clashed above their homes. Granolah noticed this peripherally, but couldn't stop, his need to hurt these Saiyans overriding concern for innocent casualties. Monaito attempted to intervene multiple times, flying into the battle's edges and begging Granolah to stop, to listen, to understand that these specific Saiyans hadn't hurt anyone on Cereal. His pleas went unheard beneath the roar of energy blasts and colliding fists, the old Namekian too weak to physically restrain any of the combatants. The revelation about Bardock came through Monaito's desperate shouting, though initially no one processed the information clearly amid combat. He screamed that a Saiyan had saved Granola's life, that not all of them were monsters, that revenge against an entire race for the actions of some was itself a kind of genocide. This claim finally penetrated Granola's awareness enough to create a pause, a moment where his attacking rhythm stuttered. The idea that the Saiyan, one of the demons from his nightmares, had rescued him contradicted everything he believed for 40 years. His identity was built on that hatred, and Monaito's words threatened to crumble the foundation. Goku and Vegeta used this pause to disengage, neither wanting to kill Granolah if this was truly a misunderstanding rather than genuine villainy. Vegeta in particular recognized the Cerelian's pain, having spent years carrying similar grudges. He understood how easily righteousness could become excuse for violence. Moneto's full explanation of the past, delivered in gasping breaths while the combatants maintained wary distance, unfolded across several quiet minutes. He described finding Bardock wounded, healing him despite knowing what Saiyans were doing to the planet, and witnessing Bardock's unexpected protection of Granola and himself from another Saiyan warrior. The detail about Bardock's scouter, still in Moneto's possession after all these years, provided physical evidence for this seemingly impossible story. When Moneto produced the device, its design clearly dating from decades past, Goku recognized it immediately as identical to ones he'd seen in historical recordings of his father. Activating the scouter's audio log and hearing Bardock's voice telling Moneto to protect the Serelian child, to keep him safe regardless of what happened, struck Granola like a physical blow. He'd imagined Saiyans as purely destructive, incapable of mercy or kindness, yet here was proof of something more complex. Goku's emotional response to hearing his father's voice, probably for the first time in his life, added another dimension to the scene. He'd grown up knowing almost nothing about Bardock, raised on Earth with no connection to Saiyan culture. This recording revealed a man capable of compassion despite being shaped by a civilization of warriors. Vegeta's quieter reaction carried its own weight. He'd known Bardock peripherally, a low-class warrior beneath notice of the Saiyan elite. Yet clearly Bardock possessed nobility that transcended social rank. It forced Vegeta to reconsider assumptions about worth and class that had been drilled into him since childhood. Granola's psychological framework began fragmenting under this information's weight. If Bardock saved him, did that death somehow cancel the genocide? Of course not. 30 million dead couldn't be balanced against one life saved. But it meant Saiyans weren't monolithic evil, which meant his revenge couldn't be either. Before this crisis could fully resolve, Gas arrived, his timing orchestrated by Elec to maximize chaos. The youngest Heater had been observing the battle from a distance, waiting for the perfect moment to strike when all parties were exhausted and confused. His entrance shifted everything again. Gas's challenge wasn't directed at Granolah alone, but at all three warriors, declaring his intention to prove himself the strongest in the universe by defeating everyone present. This grandiosity would have seemed absurd from most fighters, but the power radiating from Gas supported his claim with terrifying credibility. The subsequent four-way battle became one of the arc's most complex action sequences, each participant operating from different motivations and with different goals. Granolah wanted revenge but was now unsure against whom. Goku and Vegeta sought to protect innocence and understand the situation. Gas simply wanted validation of his strength. Gas's fighting style distinguished itself through his psychic weapon creation, manifesting different tools for different situations. Against Goku's speed, he created a massive hammer to cover wide areas. Against Vegeta's aggression, he formed shields that fed off destructive energy. Against Granola's precision, he made armor that dispersed focused attacks. The weapons themselves appeared as translucent energy constructs, shimmering with unstable power that made them visibly dangerous to touch. When they struck, they didn't just cause physical damage but disrupted ki flow, making injuries more severe and harder to heal. This made Gas particularly dangerous despite lacking the Saiyan's transformations. Gas's power level being slightly above Granola's, thanks to his more recent wish, meant he could pressure all three opponents simultaneously. The Cerelian's earlier edge over Goku and Vegeta became irrelevant when facing someone specifically enhanced to surpass him. The mathematical progression of Dragon Ball wishes created this absurd power creep. Goku and Vegeta's decision to temporarily ally with Granola against this new threat demonstrated their tactical flexibility and fundamental decency. They recognized Gas as the immediate danger, someone attacking indiscriminately rather than from understandable pain. Granola's vendetta could be resolved through words. Gas's assault required force. Granola's reluctant acceptance of this alliance showed his pragmatism beneath the rage. He still hated the Saiyans for what their race had done, But gas represented a more immediate threat to both his survival and any chance of eventual revenge against Frieza. The enemy of my enemy temporarily becomes someone you don't actively murder. The combined assault from 3 of Universe 7's strongest warriors should have overwhelmed Gas instantly, yet his wish-granted power proved sufficient to at least defend, if not dominate. He moved between opponents fluidly, never committing fully to any single target, distributing damage to prevent anyone from recovering. Vegeta's Ultra Ego grew increasingly powerful as Gas's attacks accumulated damage, the technique's core mechanic working exactly as designed. Each wound made Vegeta stronger, his Saiyan physiology and the godly technique combining into a feedback loop of escalating power. His grin widened with each injury, crossing from confidence into something approaching madness. This worried Goku, who recognized the dangerous spiral his rival was entering. Ultra Ego's strength came from embracing damage, but bodies had limits regardless of technique. If Vegeta let himself be hurt too much in pursuit of power, he'd cross from strategic endurance into permanent injury or death. Granola's evolution during this battle manifested differently than the Saiyan's transformations. His body didn't change appearance, but his right eye began glowing with increasing intensity, the enhanced vision processing reality at speeds that made time seem to slow. He could see individual atoms in Gas's energy constructs, identifying structural weaknesses invisible to normal sight. This hyperperception came with costs, primarily severe headaches as his brain struggled to process the overwhelming information flood. Oatmeal warned that maintaining this level of visual input for extended periods would cause permanent neurological damage, but Granolah ignored these warnings. 3 years of life didn't seem long enough to worry about long-term health. Gas's gradual aging became visible during the prolonged combat, his hair gaining gray streaks, fine lines appearing around his eyes. Each major technique expenditure seemed to cost months of lifespan, burning his remaining time for momentary advantages. His siblings watched from a distance, Oil and Maki looking increasingly disturbed, while Elec showed only calculating interest. The battle's environmental destruction forced Shugerian civilians to evacuate entire regions of planet Serial. Their hovering cities, built to be mobile precisely because the planet had such violent history, relocated to the far side of the world. They wanted no part of conflicts between beings who could shatter continents casually. Monaito remained nearby despite the danger, knowing his healing abilities might prove essential before everything ended. He gathered energy quietly, preparing to restore whoever survived if given the chance. The old Namekian had seen too much death across his centuries to accept more without fighting against it however he could. The turning point came when Gas, frustrated by the prolonged stalemate, attempted to access some deeper reservoir of power beyond what the wish granted. This proved disastrous, his body unable to safely channel more strength than the Dragon Balls had already provided. He began hemorrhaging energy uncontrollably, leaking power into the atmosphere. Alex shouted command to stop, to accept current limitations rather than push beyond them, went unheeded. Gas had spent his life following orders, but the wish's mental influence, combined with his innate competitive drive, overrode even his brother's authority. He needed to win, to prove himself worthy of the sacrifice made. This forced evolution rapidly accelerated Gas's aging gray hair turning white, posture becoming hunched, movements losing their fluid grace. He now resembled a man in his 70s or 80s, frail and shaking, yet somehow still radiating power that made the air around him shimmer with heat. The psychological horror of watching Gas deteriorate in real time affected everyone differently. Goku felt pity, recognizing someone trapped by others' expectations. Vegeta saw a dark mirror of his own past obsession with strength at any cost. Granolah recognized himself, someone who traded future for power without fully understanding the price. Oil finally broke, screaming at Elec that this had gone too far, that their brother was dying for a plan that wasn't worth his life. Maki joined her, both sisters demanding Elec call off the battle and get Gas medical attention before it was too late. Their rebellion came too late to matter, but showed their hierarchy fracturing. Alex's cold response, that Gas needed to finish what he started before his time ran out, crystallized his villainy more than any previous action. He wasn't just ambitious or ruthless, but genuinely willing to watch his siblings die if it served his goals. The family's bonds were entirely one-directional, obligations flowing only toward Alec, while he felt none in return. Gas's final transformation pushed beyond aged frailty into something else entirely. His body became a desiccated husk, skin drawn tight over bones, eyes sunken deep into their sockets. Yet power continued building. As if by burning away everything else, he'd concentrated his essence into pure destructive force. This form moved with renewed terrible speed, faster than before despite appearing like a walking corpse. Gas had transcended physical limitations entirely, existing as will and energy wearing a body's shape. His attacks carried the weight of someone with nothing left to lose, because he literally had nothing left. Goku and Vegeta found themselves being pushed back, their transformations insufficient against this dead thing that refused to stop. Ultra Instinct's defensive perfection meant nothing if attacks came too fast and strong to dodge. Ultra Ego's damage absorption had limits before the body simply broke regardless of mental fortitude. Granola's intervention at this critical moment involved a desperate strategy using his enhanced eye's complete perception of Gas's deteriorating body. He could see that Gas's life force was thread-thin, maintaining coherence through will alone. One precise strike to the right point would either kill him instantly or force his body to shut down protectively. The ethical weight of this decision paralyzed Granola briefly. Killing Gas would mean murdering someone who was himself a victim of manipulation, someone who'd had no real choice in becoming a weapon. But allowing Gas to continue meant potentially watching Goku and Vegeta die, and possibly Gas causing further destruction before collapsing naturally. Before Granola could act, Goku proposed a different solution, attempting to talk Gas down from his destructive spiral. He spoke about understanding the pressure of others' expectations, of feeling like you had to prove yourself through victory. Goku himself had once fought for simple pride rather than justice, learning slowly that strength meant nothing without purpose. These words penetrated Gas's deteriorating consciousness briefly, creating a moment of clarity where he saw himself from outside his own perspective. He looked pathetic, dying for a brother who didn't care, fighting people who weren't truly his enemies, wasting his final hours on meaningless conflict. The realization broke something essential in his will. Gas's collapse came not from injury but from psychological surrender, his body finally acknowledging what his mind had refused to accept. He crumpled like a puppet with cut strings, ancient-looking and fragile, barely breathing. The awesome power that had radiated from him moments before dispersed into the atmosphere, leaving only a dying man. Monaito rushed to heal Gas despite everything that had happened, his Namekian nature prioritizing life preservation above grudges or justice. His healing energy flowed into the heater, stabilizing his condition enough to prevent immediate death, but unable to restore the years burned away. Gas would live but remain aged, weak, diminished. Alec's reaction to Gas's defeat mixed fury with pragmatic calculation. The plan had failed, his strongest asset was neutralized, and he now faced enemies he couldn't defeat directly. His options narrowed to retreat or negotiation, neither of which suited his preference for controlling situations from positions of strength. His attempt to salvage something from the situation by offering information about Frieza's location in exchange for safe passage demonstrated Alec's core nature. He felt no remorse about Gas's condition, only irritation at the plan's failure. His siblings were tools that had broken, requiring replacement or different approaches. Vegeta's disgust with Alec's callousness erupted into open contempt, declaring the Elder Heater barely worth killing. This from someone who'd spent years as a ruthless warrior showed how far Vegeta had come in valuing life and honor. The Saiyan prince might still love battle, but he'd developed standards about what constituted worthy conflict. Granola's confrontation with Alec about the Heater's role in the Serelian genocide brought the arc's threads together, learning that the people who'd employed him, who'd pretended to care about his well-being while profiting from his skills, had actively participated in his race's destruction, shattered Granola's already fragile sense of reality. Alec's casual admission of this collaboration, framing it as simply good business, revealed how little Cerealian lives had mattered to anyone involved. They were inventory, resources to be liquidated, not people with cultures and histories worth preserving. This dehumanization made the genocide possible, letting perpetrators avoid confronting their actions' moral weight. Oil and Maki's horror at this revelation suggested they hadn't known the full extent of their family's involvement. They were complicit through association and inaction, but perhaps not through direct knowledge. This slight distinction did nothing to excuse them but added complexity to their culpability. Granola's choice not to immediately kill Alec, despite having every justification, demonstrated significant character growth. The old Granola, pre-Wish, would have executed him without hesitation, but learning about Bardock's mercy, seeing Gas's destruction from single-minded revenge, made him question whether killing Alec would solve anything or simply perpetuate cycles of violence. Instead, Granola demanded answers about Frieza's location, wanting to pursue his original revenge target rather than getting distracted by secondary villains. Alec, recognizing he had no leverage to refuse, provided coordinates to one of Frieza's known bases, though he noted the tyrant's movements were unpredictable and the information might be outdated. This information came with a warning that Frieza had allegedly grown far stronger since his resurrection, possibly even rivaling or surpassing Goku and Vegeta's current levels. Alec had intelligence, suggesting Frieza had been training in secret, preparing for another confrontation with the Saiyans who'd humiliated him repeatedly. Goku and Vegeta's reaction to this news mixed concern with excitement, their Saiyan nature responding to any mention of strong opponents, despite knowing they should probably feel more worried. The prospect of Frieza becoming a genuine threat again after years as an afterthought danger created complicated emotions. The revelation about Frieza's training location being in a different dimension, a space where time flowed differently from normal universe, shocked everyone. Such dimensional pockets were theoretically possible but required technology or magical knowledge far beyond most civilizations' capabilities. Frieza had access to resources beyond what anyone suspected. This dimensional training ground, functioning similarly to the hyperbolic time chamber, but apparently more stable and comfortable, allowed Frieza to spend years training while only days passed externally. The implications were staggering. He could have accumulated decades of combat evolution in the months since his resurrection. The mathematics worked horrifically in Frieza's favor. If the dimension's time flowed at even 10-to-1 ratio compared to normal space, Frieza could train for 10 years while Goku and Vegeta experienced 1. Given Frieza's known 4-month achievement of golden form, dedicated years of training could produce exponential growth. Frieza's natural talent had always exceeded most warriors, his power increasing dramatically with minimal effort. When Goku first battled him on Namek, Frieza admitted never training once in his life because he'd never needed to. That such a prodigious talent finally applied discipline to cultivation suggested terrifying potential results. The form Frieza developed through this extended training, revealed in the arc's climax, was designated Black Frieza based on its coloration. Unlike Golden Frieza's shimmering radiance, Black Frieza appeared as dark purple-black with subtle highlights, giving him an ominous, almost void-like presence. The color scheme suggested something beyond previous transformations. Black Frieza's design deliberately invoked finality and culmination, the darkest shade suggesting no further evolution remained. Where previous forms had been about accumulating more power through bigger muscles or brighter auras, this form seemed compressed, refined, power densified to its purest expression. The power gap between Black Frieza and Goku's true Ultra Instinct or Vegeta's Ultra Ego proved enormous despite their godly techniques. When Frieza arrived on planet Cereal at the arc's conclusion, he effortlessly defeated both Saiyans with single blows, before they could meaningfully respond. The transformation rendered months of their training functionally irrelevant. Frieza's arrival was precipitated by Alec's desperate attempt to manipulate events one final time. Having secretly contacted Frieza and informed him about powerful warriors gathering on Serial, Alec hoped Frieza would kill everyone, cleaning up loose ends. But this backfired when Frieza killed Alec first for presuming to manipulate him. The ease with which Frieza executed Alec, simply crushing the Heater's skull with one hand while discussing business, emphasized the tyrant's casual cruelty. He could have killed Alec painlessly or ignored him entirely, but chose violence as punctuation to a conversation. Life meant nothing to Frieza except as currency for negotiation or demonstration. Gas's final moments, lying aged and broken while Frieza approached, carried tragic poetry. He'd burned his entire life pursuing strength at his brother's command, and in his final conscious moments, he witnessed someone incomparably stronger treating that sacrifice as irrelevant. His death came as almost a mercy. Frieza's comment that he'd been aware of the Heater's manipulation attempts for 40 years revealed the intelligence network's depth the tyrant commanded. Nothing significant happened in Universe 7 without Frieza knowing, maintaining files on potential threats and allies alike. The Heater's supposedly subtle scheming had been transparent to him from the start. His declaration that there was nothing in the universe he wasn't privy to carried genuine weight given his organization's resources. The Frieza Force at its peak controlled approximately 70% of Universe 7's inhabited planets, creating an intelligence apparatus that dwarfed anything the Galactic Patrol or other factions could marshal. Frieza's interaction with Goku and Vegeta after defeating them showcased his evolved psychology. He didn't gloat excessively or monologue about his superiority like in previous encounters. Instead, he simply demonstrated overwhelming power and left, secure enough to not need validation from enemies he'd surpassed. This restraint made him more threatening than any amount of theatrical villainy. His recruitment of Oil and Maki into his organization demonstrated pragmatic resource management. They possessed knowledge and skills valuable to his operations, and their family's destruction left them vulnerable to offers of protection and purpose. Frieza understood that broken people made loyal servants if you gave them something to rebuild around. The sisters' acceptance of this recruitment, though forced by circumstance, showed how quickly survival instinct could override loyalty or morality. They just watched Frieza murder their brothers, yet fear of meeting the same fate compelled obedience. This dynamic of domination through overwhelming force was Frieza's specialty. Whis' intervention to save Monaito, who'd been fatally injured during Gas's rampage, served as the arc's single genuine miracle. The Angel bent rules by directly interfering in mortal affairs, but justified it as a favor to Goku rather than violation of Angel protocols. This gray area showed even angels could be swayed by friendship. Monaito's resurrection came as complete restoration rather than simple healing, his aged body temporarily invigorated to what it had been decades prior. This wouldn't last permanently, but gave the Namekian years he'd otherwise lacked. Whis' power operating on a fundamentally different level than normal healing made such comprehensive restoration possible. Granola's relief at Monaito's survival outweighed even his frustration at failing to reach Frieza. The old Namekian represented his last connection to childhood, to anyone who remembered him before revenge consumed everything. Losing Monaito would have erased the final anchor to who Granola had been before trauma reshaped him. The decision to use Planet Serial's Dragon Balls to repair the battle's environmental damage rather than wishing for restored lifespan showed Granola's evolving priorities. He could have potentially negotiated better terms than his original wish, but chose to heal the land his people once inhabited. This reflected caring about legacy beyond personal survival. Vegeta's gift of the Dragon Radar to Granola, recovered from where Maki dropped it during combat, symbolized a kind of peace offering between Saiyans and Cerealians. The gesture acknowledged that while Vegeta couldn't undo the past, he could contribute to building a different future. Small kindnesses couldn't resurrect the dead, but could honor their memory through helping the living. Goku receiving Bardock's scouter from Monaito created a tangible connection to the father he'd never known. The device contained no special powers, wasn't particularly valuable, but represented a direct physical link across decades. Goku's reflection visible in the scouter's lens, looking so much like Bardock, emphasized generational continuity despite vastly different life paths. The invitation for Granola to visit Earth if he ever wanted to fight Saiyans again showed typical Goku optimism about friendship through combat. What Granola heard as casual offer of violence, Goku meant as genuine connection attempt. Their fundamental misunderstanding of each other's communication styles demonstrated how far they still had to go in mutual understanding. Granola's assertion that he'd win any such future encounter displayed lingering pride despite everything he'd learned. This wasn't necessarily bad. Maintaining confidence helped keep him moving forward rather than drowning in despair. As long as pride didn't become obsession, it could fuel positive growth. The departure of Goku, Vegeta, and Whis left planet Cereal in strange quiet after days of apocalyptic combat. Buildings still smoldered, landscapes bore crater scars, but the cosmic-level fighters had gone. Granola and Monaito remained, two survivors among ruins old and new, tasked with deciding what came next. Granola's contemplation of his remaining 3 years carried different weight now than when first learned. Those years no longer seemed like just countdown to revenge, but potential space for rebuilding, for discovering if Serelian culture could be remembered and honored even by a single person. Whether he'd choose that path remained uncertain. The arc concluded with Goku and Vegeta resuming training on Beerus's planet, aware that the gap between them and Frieza now demanded serious work to close. Their friendly rivalry continued, but both recognized that complacency could be fatal. Frieza's re-emergence as legitimate threat rather than joke villain refocused their cultivation efforts. Beerus's grumbling about getting dragged into mortal conflicts again carried less genuine annoyance than he pretended. The Destroyer God had grown fond of these Saiyans, despite himself, invested in their survival, if not their specific goals. He'd continue teaching them partly from self-interest, but also from something approaching actual care. Whis' observation to Goku that the strongest being in the universe might be Frieza, or might be someone else entirely, suggested the Oracle Fish's prophecy remained unfulfilled. If Black Frieza represented that prophesied threat, the immediate danger was known. But if someone even stronger lurked in Universe 7, the future held darker challenges still. The Granolah Arc, spanning those 14 manga chapters released across nearly 3 years, represented a tonal shift for Dragon Ball Super. It emphasized consequences and costs of power in ways the franchise typically avoided. Characters made terrible choices and suffered appropriate results, unable to simply train harder to overcome problems they'd created. Granola trading his lifespan for strength wasn't portrayed as heroic sacrifice but as desperate self-destruction. The narrative didn't validate his choice even as it made him temporarily powerful. This unusual willingness to show a protagonist's major decision as fundamentally wrong added moral complexity Dragon Ball rarely explored. Similarly, Gas's exploitation by Alec wasn't framed as noble loyalty, but as tragic manipulation. The arc refused to romanticize obedience or family bonds that were actually abusive. This critical examination of power structures, even within villain factions, gave the story unexpected depth. The revelation about Bardock saving Granolah complicated the simple revenge narrative in important ways. It didn't absolve Saiyans collectively of genocide, didn't make the Cerealian destruction acceptable, but showed that even within systems of oppression, individuals could choose differently. Bardock's moment of mercy rippled forward across 40 years, saving Granolah and eventually contributing to better understanding between survivors and descendants. The thematic exploration of what it means to be strongest questioned the value Dragon Ball traditionally placed on power hierarchies. Granolah and Gas both achieved the title through shortcuts rather than genuine growth, and both paid horrific prices. Meanwhile, Goku and Vegeta's slower cultivation, while leaving them temporarily weaker, allowed for sustainable development without self-destruction. The arc suggested that strength gained through understanding, through processing trauma, through building connections, mattered more than raw power level. This was radical philosophy for a series built on increasingly large numbers and flashy transformations. Granola ended the arc stronger but emptier, while Goku and Vegeta grew in ways beyond simple statistics. Frieza's role as final antagonist recontextualized the entire arc. While Granolah and Gas destroyed themselves chasing power, Frieza pursued the same goal with patience and resources, achieving better results through superior methodology. This didn't make Frieza admirable, but demonstrated that intelligence and planning enhanced natural talent more than desperate wishes. The tyrant's willingness to spend years training in isolation despite hating effort showed how seriously he took the threat Goku represented. Someone who'd never trained once in his life, dedicated potentially decades to cultivation purely to reclaim superiority. This obsession mirrored Granola's in many ways, though Frieza had resources to pursue it more sustainably. Black Frieza's emergence as a transformation surpassing godly techniques challenged assumptions about training paths and power ceilings. Goku had unlocked the Angel's secret technique. Vegeta had learned the Gods of Destruction's art, yet someone working alone outside divine systems exceeded both. Perhaps the Gods' techniques weren't actually the ultimate path. This opened narrative possibilities for future stories about alternative methods of reaching transcendent power. If Frieza could do it through sheer determination and time, others might as well. The universe potentially contained dozens of training methods equal or superior to Ultra Instinct and Ultra Ego, waiting for discovery. The arc's handling of generational trauma through Granolah's character added psychological realism unusual for Dragon Ball. His inability to simply forgive and move on, even after learning about Bardock, reflected how deeply genocide wounds communities. Healing from that magnitude of loss couldn't happen through one conversation or revelation. Granolah's survivor's guilt, manifest in his self-destructive wish, showed how trauma could convince people they didn't deserve to live while others died. He unconsciously punished himself through the lifespan sacrifice, as if existing when 30 million others couldn't somehow made him guilty. This psychological complexity elevated his character beyond simple revenge archetype. The relationship between Granolah and Monaito exemplified healthy versus unhealthy approaches to trauma. Monaito, equally traumatized by witnessing the genocide, chose healing and protection rather than revenge. He built a life focused on preserving what remained rather than destroying what continued. His example provided Granolah an alternative path, though whether Granolah could accept it remained questionable. Monaito's Namekian nature, with its emphasis on growth and healing rather than destruction, positioned him as moral counterpoint to the Saiyan warrior culture. Where Saiyans found meaning through combat and conquest, Namekians created purpose through nurturing life. These opposing philosophies clashed throughout the arc in productive ways. The arc's examination of the Saiyan race's historical sins through Vegeta's awareness and Goku's ignorance highlighted different forms of inherited guilt. Vegeta knew what his people had done, carried that knowledge as weight, but couldn't change the past. Goku's Earth upbringing spared him that cultural baggage, but learning about it forced him to reconcile his nature with his race's legacy. Neither Saiyan bore personal responsibility for planet Serial's destruction, occurring before their births, yet they faced consequences anyway. Granolah's initial attack on them demonstrated how victims often couldn't separate individuals from categories, how pain made nuance difficult. The arc explored this unfairness without resolving it neatly. Vegeta's ultra ego development, paralleling the arc's themes about accepting destructive impulses, added interesting subtext. The technique required embracing the pleasure of battle, of taking damage, of inflicting violence. This was everything Vegeta had spent years trying to move past, yet Beerus suggested it could be a path to power rivaling Goku's enlightenment. The philosophical question of whether becoming more violent and aggressive could somehow be virtuous troubled Vegeta visibly. He wanted strength, but not at the cost of regressing to who he'd been as Frieza's enforcer. Finding a way to use Ultra Ego without losing his hard-won growth became its own challenge beyond simply mastering the technique. Ultra Ego's mechanic of growing stronger through taking damage created dangerous incentive structures. Vegeta had to let himself be hurt, had to endure attacks that might kill him, to access the form's full power. This required insane confidence and constituted self-harm as tactical choice. The technique was powerful, but psychologically corrosive. Goku's true Ultra Instinct, while seemingly healthier mentally, came with its own costs. Maintaining the emotionless state required suppressing parts of his personality, becoming less himself to become more effective. The technique wanted him to be nobody, an empty vessel for instinctive reaction, which meant surrendering the qualities that made him Goku. The arc questioned whether either godly technique was actually worth the psychological prices demanded. Both Saiyans had to sacrifice aspects of themselves, become less whole to access these powers. Perhaps the gods could use them safely because they weren't mortal, didn't have to balance divine techniques with mortal psychology. Gas's psychic weapon creation ability represented a unique power system that deserved more exploration than the arc provided. The idea of manifesting tools from imagination and energy felt distinctly different from standard Dragon Ball beam attacks and physical strikes. His fighting style had genuine creativity. The weapons Gas created reflected his mental state, becoming more elaborate and exotic as his mind deteriorated. Early in the arc, he used simple swords and spears. Later, he manifested bizarre implements that seemed designed by someone losing touch with reality. This artistic choice visually demonstrated his psychological decline. If Gas had survived with his powers intact, he could have been a fascinating ally or recurring rival. His abilities encouraged tactical thinking over raw power, adapting tools to counter specific opponents. This flexibility made him dangerous, despite lacking Saiyan battle evolution or other innate growth mechanics. The Heaters as an organization represented Dragon Ball's rare attempt at intelligence-focused villains rather than warriors. Elec controlled events through information and manipulation rather than personal strength. This made the group's ultimate failure against superior force feel thematically important. Sometimes cunning couldn't overcome raw power. Elec's death at Frieza's hands demonstrated the limits of scheming without personal ability. He'd positioned Gas as his weapon, viewing direct combat as beneath him. But when that weapon failed, he had no defense. Frieza, combining intelligence with overwhelming power, represented what Elec aspired to be, but with none of the weaknesses. Oil and Maki's survival and recruitment into Frieza's forces left narrative threads for potential future development. They possessed their families' intelligence networks and skills, but now served someone who wouldn't hesitate to kill them if convenient. Their arc remained unfinished, suggesting possible return in later stories. The Shugarian population of planet Serial remained mostly background elements, but their presence added depth to the setting. They'd purchased a planet soaked in genocide, built their civilization on mass graves, and seemed largely unaware or unconcerned about this history. This casual exploitation of tragedy felt realistically ugly. Granola's complicated relationship with the Sugarians who'd replaced his people showed admirable restraint. He didn't blame them for the Cerealians' destruction or resent their presence, understanding they'd simply bought land offered for sale. His anger focused on actual perpetrators rather than those who benefited incidentally from genocide's aftermath. The Serialian Dragon Ball's limited capability compared to Earth's or Namek's created interesting narrative constraints. Single wish limitation forced more careful consideration about what to ask for, making each summoning more precious. This scarcity made Granolah's choice to use his wish for power rather than lifespan restoration more impactful. Torambo's ancient nature and archaic speech patterns suggested the Serialian Dragon Balls predated even the Namekian exodus that spread dragons across the universe. Perhaps Cerealian culture had independently discovered the magic rather than receiving it from Namekian visitors. This possibility remained unexplored but intriguing. The arc's conclusion, with Granolah and Monaito remaining on planet Cereal to rebuild what they could, offered hope without false optimism. They couldn't resurrect the dead or undo 40 years of trauma, but they could honor memory through persistence. Sometimes that was enough, or had to be. Granolah's 3 remaining years, regardless of how he chose to use them, represented more than mere countdown to death. They were opportunity to decide what kind of legacy he'd leave, what his life would mean beyond suffering and revenge. The arc suggested he might choose better paths without guaranteeing he would. The story asked difficult questions about justice, revenge, strength, family, and legacy without providing easy answers. Characters made choices and faced consequences, some deserved and some unjust. This ambiguity felt more honest than Dragon Ball's typical moral clarity, treating readers as capable of processing complexity. The Granolah arc's mixed reception among fans reflected this tonal shift. Some appreciated the deeper character work and psychological exploration. Others felt it dragged, preferring Dragon Ball's traditional focus on action and power escalation. Both perspectives held validity, wanting different things from the franchise. Toyotaro's artwork throughout the arc demonstrated his growth as manga artist, with panel composition and character expressions conveying emotion more effectively than in earlier Super chapters. Action sequences maintained clarity despite the chaotic combat, a technical achievement harder than it appeared. Akira Toriyama's guidance shaped the arc's major plot points and character decisions while letting Toyotaro handle execution. This collaboration worked better than either creator might have managed alone, blending Toriyama's narrative instincts with Toyotaro's technical skill and Dragon Ball knowledge. The arc's themes about the cost of power resonated with Dragon Ball's long history, but examined them more critically than previous stories. Goku and Vegeta had always pursued strength, but past arcs presented this as purely positive. The Granolah arc questioned whether that obsession was healthy or sustainable. By showing how shortcuts to power destroyed gas and left Granolah empty, the story implicitly validated Goku and Vegeta's longer training paths. Their growth might be slower, but it was genuine, sustainable, building them up rather than burning them down. The arc suggested that how you gain strength matters as much as strength itself. Frieza's training montage, implied rather than shown, stood as counterexample to this theme. He achieved results similar to Granolah's wish through different methods, suggesting multiple paths existed to any goal. Some paths were healthier than others, but raw effectiveness varied independently from morality. The revelation of Frieza's dimensional training space opened narrative possibilities for future arcs. If such places existed, others might discover them, creating similar time discrepancy advantages. This could explain sudden power jumps in future antagonists, without requiring constant wish-granting mechanisms. The arc's ending, with Frieza departing after casually crushing Goku and Vegeta, subverted expectations about final battles. Usually, Dragon Ball arcs concluded with villains defeated. Here, the ultimate antagonist won decisively and left, establishing ongoing threat. This narrative choice created uncertainty about future confrontations. Goku and Vegeta's return to training, aware they'd been surpassed again, maintained the eternal cycle at Dragon Ball's core. They'd get stronger, new threats would emerge, they'd train more, repeat indefinitely. This predictability provided comfort, even as the arc attempted innovation elsewhere. Whis' suggestion that someone other than Frieza might be the universe's strongest left the door open for future antagonists. The Oracle Fish's prophecy remained ambiguous enough to accommodate multiple interpretations. This narrative flexibility let future writers introduce new threats without contradicting established story. The Granolah arc ultimately asked what happens when revenge consumes someone completely, when the need for vengeance becomes identity itself. It showed that answer wasn't heroic sacrifice or satisfying victory, but hollow waste, burning life for nothing that mattered. This tragic warning felt necessary for a franchise often cavalier about violence. Granolah's choice at the arc's end Whether to use his remaining years for continued revenge or attempt healing would define his character's ultimate meaning. The story left this deliberately unresolved, trusting readers to understand both paths remained possible. Neither would be easy or completely satisfying, reflecting real life's ambiguity. Monaito's survival guaranteed Granolah wouldn't face his final years alone, providing support regardless of which path the Cerealian chose. This simple companionship, having someone who cared without demanding anything, might prove more valuable than any power or revenge. The arc suggested relationships mattered more than strength. The contrast between the Heater's toxic family dynamics and Granolah and Monaito's chosen family highlighted how blood relations guaranteed nothing. Elec, Oil, Maki, and Gas were siblings who destroyed each other. Granolah and Monaito were strangers who built something better. Connection's quality mattered more than its origin. The arc's treatment of Bardock added layers to the character without contradicting previous depictions. He remained a Saiyan warrior who'd participated in countless invasions, but showed capacity for growth and moral choice. This nuance honored his complexity rather than simplifying him into pure hero or villain. The scouter Bardock left behind became symbol of how small choices ripple forward unpredictably. He gave Monaito a device for safekeeping, probably thinking little of it. 40 years later, that scouter helped his son connect to heritage he'd never known. Kindness could echo across decades, touching people who'd never meet. Vegeta's gift of the Dragon Radar paralleled Bardock's scouter gift structurally, showing how Saiyans in different eras could choose mercy over efficiency. Neither gesture changed enormous injustices, but they acknowledged individual worth beyond strategic value. These small humanities prevented complete despair. Goku's inheritance of Bardock's scouter created physical link to father he'd never known, device that had witnessed history Goku couldn't access otherwise. Whether he'd keep it or pass it on remained unclear, but for the moment, he carried his father's possession, making Bardock's memory tangible. The arc's final images, depending on the chapter, showed either Granolah and Monaito standing among ruins or Goku and Vegeta training, suggesting ongoing cycles of destruction and growth. Both sets of characters faced uncertain futures, armed with lessons learned and scars earned. Whether those lessons would prevent future mistakes remained to be seen. The arc's pacing across its serialization created unique reading experience compared to consuming it all at once. Monthly releases meant fans spent 2.5 years with these characters, discussing each chapter's revelations, theorizing about future developments, building anticipation that couldn't exist in binge reading. This extended engagement let themes marinate in ways weekly or daily releases couldn't achieve. Readers had time to process Granolah's trauma between chapters, to consider the ethical implications of his wish, to debate whether revenge could ever be justified. The story benefited from this breathing room, becoming richer through community discussion. The wait between chapters also meant characters aged in real time for readers, even as fictional timeline moved faster. Fans who started reading when the arc began were years older by its conclusion, potentially experiencing their own life changes that reframed how they understood the story. This synchronicity between reader growth and narrative progression added metatextual depth. Toyotaro's artistic evolution across these chapters showed visible improvement in anatomy, perspective, and visual storytelling. Early Granolah Arc chapters contained occasional stiff poses or awkward panel transitions, but later installments flowed more naturally. This growth happened publicly, letting readers witness a mangaka refining his craft. The decision to publish in V-Jump rather than weekly Shonen Jump meant the manga could take more time with each chapter, producing higher art quality and more detailed backgrounds. V-Jump's monthly schedule allowed for approximately 45 pages per chapter instead of 15 to 20, giving stories room to breathe. This format particularly suited the Granolah Arc's contemplative moments, panels lingering on characters' expressions as they processed revelations about their pasts. A weekly manga might have rushed through these sequences to maintain action pacing, but monthly publication permitted emotional beats their necessary space. The arc's structure followed a pattern of escalating revelations, each chapter adding context that reframed previous events. What started as straightforward revenge quest revealed layers of manipulation, generational trauma, and moral complexity. This gradual unfolding rewarded patient readers who paid attention to details. Granola's character design evolved subtly throughout the arc as well, his facial expressions becoming more nuanced as Toyotaro grew comfortable drawing him. Early chapters showed Granola with relatively simple emotional range, but later depictions captured exhaustion, grief, rage, and rare moments of peace with equal effectiveness. The Serelian's signature eye patch, initially just a visual quirk, gained narrative significance through revelations about his enhanced vision. What could have been mere aesthetic choice became character-defining trait connected to his species' biology and combat style. This integration of design and story demonstrated thoughtful world-building. Oatmeal's visualization as both physical device and anthropomorphized AI companion created interesting visual opportunities. Sometimes depicted as merely the headpiece Granolah wore, other times shown as holographic interface with personality, the AI's presentation shifted based on narrative needs without feeling inconsistent. The AI's voice, though never actually heard by readers, was described as feminine and calm, providing counterpoint to Granola's intensity. This relationship dynamic, human and artificial intelligence supporting each other through trauma, added science fiction elements to Dragon Ball's typically fantasy-oriented technology. Monaito's design deliberately evoked traditional wise mentor archetype while subverting it through Namekian biology. His elderly appearance, hunched posture, and gentle demeanor fit mentor expectations, but his alien nature prevented him from being generic wise old human. This balance honored tradition while maintaining Dragon Ball's unique aesthetic. The Namekian's simple robes and modest living space contrasted sharply with the advanced technology and elaborate architecture seen elsewhere in the arc. His choice to live simply despite being capable of creating more comfortable surroundings suggested philosophical commitment to humility and minimalism. His Namekian house, briefly glimpsed in several panels, contained shelves of preserved Cerealian artifacts that Granola had recovered from ruins over the years. These objects, carefully maintained by Monaito, represented physical links to extinct culture. Their presence showed the Namekian honored Granola's heritage, even as the Cerelian himself struggled with it. The artifacts themselves ranged from practical items like tools and containers to cultural objects like musical instruments and religious symbols. Each piece had survived genocide by chance, hidden in rubble or locations invaders missed. Collectively, they comprised a fragmentary museum of what Serelian civilization had been. Granola's reluctance to interact with these artifacts, preferring to let Monaito maintain them, revealed his complicated relationship with his heritage. Engaging with Cerealian culture meant confronting loss directly, feeling the absence of people who'd created and used these objects. Sometimes ignorance felt less painful than knowledge. Yet Monaito's insistence on preserving these items, on teaching Granola what he remembered of Serelian history, ensured the culture wouldn't die completely. Even if Granola was the last Cerelian, even if the language and customs faded with him, these objects would remain as testimony that the civilization had existed. The Cerelian language, mentioned occasionally throughout the arc, existed primarily as fragments in Oatmeal's databases and Monaito's imperfect memory. Neither Monaito nor Granola spoke it fluently, the former because he'd never fully learned it, the latter because he'd been too young when his mother died to absorb more than basic phrases. Still, Granola knew enough Cerealian to recognize the lullaby Oatmeal occasionally played, his mother's voice singing words he couldn't translate but felt in his chest. The melody carried emotional weight beyond linguistic meaning, triggering memories of safety and love from before everything burned. These recordings, preserved in Oatmeal's memory banks, represented the last examples of spoken Cerealians still existing. When Granolah died, unless he taught someone else or passed Oatmeal to another keeper, the language would effectively become extinct, surviving only as text fragments scholars might eventually decipher. This linguistic death paralleled the physical genocide, showing how destroying a people meant erasing multiple dimensions of existence. Buildings could be rebuilt, populations could recover over generations, but lost languages rarely returned. The specific ways Cerealians thought about and described reality would vanish with their final speaker. The arc never explicitly addressed whether Granolah felt responsibility to preserve his language and culture, or if that burden felt too heavy alongside everything else he carried. His silence on the matter suggested he hadn't decided, or perhaps couldn't bear thinking about it directly. Monaito's attempts to discuss cultural preservation usually met deflection from Granolah, who preferred focusing on immediate concerns rather than abstract legacy. This avoidance was understandable survival mechanism, though it meant opportunities to record knowledge were being lost with each passing day. The relationship between trauma and cultural memory formed one of the arc's subtler threads. Granolah's people had been destroyed specifically because they preserved knowledge, making their libraries valuable commodities. In some way, Serelian dedication to archiving information had contributed to their destruction, creating perverse incentive to forget rather than remember. This irony wasn't lost on Granolah, who sometimes wondered if his people would have survived if they'd been warriors instead of scholars. Perhaps if Cerealians had valued strength over knowledge, they could have defended themselves. These thoughts tormented him despite their fundamental unfairness. The victim blaming implicit in such reasoning demonstrated how trauma distorted thinking, making sufferers question themselves rather than perpetrators. Granolah's people weren't destroyed because they were weak, but because stronger forces wanted what they had and saw no reason to negotiate. Their nature was irrelevant to that calculus. Monaito's gentle corrections when Granolah ventured into this mental territory showed the Namekian's understanding of trauma's psychological patterns. He'd seen countless beings torture themselves with counterfactuals, alternate histories where different choices might have prevented tragedies. He knew such thinking led nowhere productive, but had to be acknowledged rather than dismissed. The arc's exploration of survivors' guilt through Granolah's character felt unusually nuanced for Dragon Ball, acknowledging how arbitrary survival could feel. Why had Granolah lived when millions died? The answer was pure chance, Monaito and Bardock's intervention, but chance felt insufficient to justify continued existence. This psychological burden manifested in Granolah's recklessness throughout the arc, his willingness to sacrifice his lifespan, his seeking out dangerous missions. He was unconsciously trying to prove his survival worthwhile through extraordinary deeds, as if enough accomplishments might retroactively justify being the one who lived. The wish to become strongest represented culmination of this pattern, ultimate attempt to transform random survival into chosen destiny. If he was strongest, then perhaps there was reason he lived when others didn't. Power could rewrite arbitrary chance into meaningful pattern. Of course, the wish didn't actually provide this psychological relief. Granolah achieved the strength he sought but felt no more justified in existing. The emptiness remained because power couldn't resolve questions that had no real answers. Some pain couldn't be fixed, only carried. Monaito's role throughout the arc as living embodiment of healthier trauma response provided implicit alternative to Granolah's path. The Namekian had witnessed equal horror, carried similar losses, yet chose nurturing over revenge. His way wasn't perfect either, sometimes enabling Granolah's self-destruction through excessive accommodation, but offered different models. The contrast between their approaches showed how trauma didn't determine response, how individuals could experience identical events and make different choices. Monaito chose to create meaning through protecting life. Granolah chose to create meaning through destroying those who destroyed. Neither was wrong or right, absolutely, but consequences differed. The arc suggested that Monaito's path while slower and less dramatically satisfying, led to something sustainable. He could continue healing and protecting indefinitely, building gradually toward positive outcomes. Granola's path had built-in expiration date, literally counting down to his death. This didn't mean revenge was never justified, or that Monaito's passive resistance was always correct. The arc wasn't arguing for absolute pacifism, but it suggested that making revenge one's entire identity guaranteed hollow victory at best, self-destruction at worst. Gas's parallel journey underscored this theme from different angle. He destroyed himself not for his own revenge, but someone else's ambition, showing how external pressure could be as destructive as internal compulsion. Whether one burned oneself or was burned by others, the end result involved consumed life. Alec's manipulation of gas demonstrated how families could be sites of terrible harm despite cultural narratives about familial love and loyalty. Not all families were safe, not all siblings cared for each other, not all parental-style authority was benevolent. The arc acknowledged this darkness without dwelling on it gratuitously. Oil and Maki's complicity through inaction, their awareness that Alec was wrong, but unwillingness to effectively oppose him, showed how abuse systems sustained themselves through widespread participation. They weren't as bad as Alec, but still enabled his worst impulses, making them complicit in Gas's destruction. Their guilt over Gas's fate, visible in their expressions and hesitant protests, suggested they knew this but couldn't overcome years of conditioning to obey their eldest sibling. Breaking free from abusive family dynamics, especially when physical safety depended on the abuser, required resources and support they didn't have. Frieza's recruitment of them at Arc's end could be read as either liberation or new captivity. They escaped Alec's control, but entered service to someone potentially more dangerous. However, Frieza at least offered clear transactional relationship, rather than demanding emotional loyalty. Sometimes honest tyranny was preferable to abuse masked as love. The sisters' future under Frieza's command remained uncertain, left as narrative thread for potential exploration in later stories. They possessed skills and knowledge valuable to his organization, but Frieza's track record with subordinates suggested their survival depended on continued usefulness. This precarious position mirrored many real situations where escaping one bad situation meant accepting another imperfect one because better options didn't exist. Perfect solutions rarely presented themselves. Oil and Maki chose the option most likely to keep them alive, which was its own form of wisdom. The arc's treatment of female characters through Oil and Maki was notably brief, the sisters receiving less development than their brothers despite surviving longer. This reflected Dragon Ball's ongoing struggle with giving female characters significant narrative space and agency. Still, their survival and recruitment at least left possibilities for future development, unlike Gas and Alec's definitive deaths. Whether future stories would capitalize on these possibilities remained to be seen, but the option existed. Maki's demonstrated abilities during the brief combat shown included energy manipulation and tactical analysis, suggesting combat capability beyond mere support role. Oil displayed similar skills, though neither received extended action sequences to fully showcase their capabilities. This represented missed opportunity within the arc structure, as exploring their perspectives and abilities could have added depth while diversifying the cast. The story remained primarily focused on male characters, continuing Dragon Ball's historical pattern. The Shugarian background characters similarly remained mostly undeveloped, despite their numerical presence on planet Cereal. Their insectoid design distinguished them visually from humanoid characters, but their culture, politics, and individual personalities went largely unexplored. This wasn't necessarily a flaw, as not every story needs to deeply develop all background elements, but it meant Planet Cereal felt somewhat hollow as a setting. The planet was primarily a battlefield rather than a living place with communities and histories of its own. The brief glimpses of Shugarian architecture, with its organic curves and hive-like structures, suggested interesting alien aesthetic that could have been explored further. Their cities looked fundamentally different from typical Dragon Ball locations, implying different cultural values and priorities. Their purchase of planet Serial after the genocide and lack of apparent guilt about this raised questions the arc didn't address. Did they know about the Cerealian destruction when they bought the planet? If so, did they care? How did they justify building en masse graves? These questions weren't necessarily the arc's responsibility to answer, but their presence added to the moral complexity of the setting. Planet Serial existed in state of incomplete healing. New civilization built atop old one's bones without proper reckoning with that history. Granolah's navigation of this reality, living among beings who'd replaced his people without apparent awareness of or concern for what that meant, must have been daily exercise in restraint. Every Shugarian he passed was innocent individually, but part of system that had erased his culture. This complicated relationship to his own homeworld mirrored larger questions about return and belonging. Planet Serial was Granola's home, the place he'd been born, but it wasn't the cereal his mother knew. Could it ever feel like home again when everything familiar had been destroyed? The arc left these questions unresolved, allowing them to remain as ongoing tension in Granola's psychology. Perhaps he'd eventually make peace with Planet Serial as it now existed. Perhaps he'd leave and never return. Both options carried their own grief. The Dragon Ball's role in the arc as wish-granting devices highlighted their narrative function as shortcuts and their thematic representation of desire. Characters wished for power rather than wisdom, for strength rather than healing, revealing their priorities and limitations. Granola could have wished for his people's resurrection, though Serelian Dragon Balls likely lacked that capability given their limited power. He could have wished for Frieza's location or death, achieving revenge more directly. Instead, he wished for personal strength, showing his fundamental belief that power solved problems. This belief was understandable given his experiences. Powerlessness had defined his trauma, unable to protect his mother or people from stronger forces. Logically, becoming strongest would prevent similar helplessness, but power couldn't resurrect the dead or heal psychological wounds, making the wish's limitations tragically predictable. Gas's identical wish revealed how common this reasoning was. How many beings in Universe 7 believed strength was the ultimate solution? The wish's availability through Dragon Balls meant this belief could be tested directly, with predictable tragic results. The arc suggested that easily gained power corrupted not through moral failing, but through skipping the growth that accompanied earned strength. Goku and Vegeta's training taught patience, perseverance, humility alongside increasing their power levels. Wish-granted strength provided none of these lessons. This theme extended Dragon Ball's long-standing interest in training and self-improvement, though here examined more critically. The franchise had always valued hard work over shortcuts, but usually portrayed this as purely practical rather than moral. The Granolah Arc suggested the journey mattered for psychological and ethical reasons, beyond just better results. Frieza's training in the dimensional space complicated this theme by showing that shortcuts could work if properly applied. His time chamber training was technically a shortcut, compressing years into shorter external timeline, yet he still had to do the actual work. The difference between his approach and Granola's wish was active effort versus passive reception. This distinction preserved the arc's theme while acknowledging that efficiency wasn't inherently wrong. Smart use of resources and opportunities was simply strategic. But there was difference between efficient training and skipping training entirely through magical means. The dimensional training space itself raised questions about fairness and access. If such places existed, why weren't they more widely available? What prevented others from using similar methods? The answer likely involved resources and knowledge, creating inequality in opportunity. Frieza's wealth and organization gave him access to training methods most beings couldn't afford or discover. This reflected real-world dynamics where resources enabled some people to advance faster than others, regardless of inherent talent or work ethic. The universe wasn't fair, and the arc didn't pretend otherwise. This unfairness extended to the wish mechanics as well. Dragon Balls weren't equally accessible to all beings. Finding them required knowledge of their existence, ability to locate them, and opportunity to make wishes without interference. These factors created unequal access to reality-altering power. Granolah had advantages enabling his wish that most beings lacked. He lived on a planet with Dragon Balls and knew a being who could summon them. Most Universe 7 inhabitants possessed neither advantage, meaning their paths to power were more limited. This raised ethical questions about whether Granolah's wish was wrong not just for its self-destructive consequences, but for leveraging unfair advantages. If most beings couldn't make such wishes, was using that ability to gain power over them somehow cheating at existence? The arc didn't answer this directly, but Granolah's ultimate emptiness, despite achieving his wish, suggested that fairness wasn't the relevant framework. Whether or not the wish was earned or deserved, it didn't provide what Granolah actually needed. Power without purpose was just capacity for destruction. The thematic emphasis on purpose and meaning over pure strength represented evolved philosophy for Dragon Ball. Earlier arcs had sometimes suggested power itself was intrinsically valuable, that getting stronger was sufficient goal. The Granolah arc questioned this assumption. Granolah became strongest in the universe and felt miserable. Gas became strongest in the universe and died horribly. Power alone guaranteed nothing about happiness, fulfillment, or moral worth. The arc forced readers to confront this reality alongside its characters. This didn't mean power was bad, or that characters should stop pursuing it. Goku and Vegeta's continued training was portrayed as valid, even admirable. But the arc distinguished between seeking power as means to protect others or test oneself versus seeking power as identity or revenge. The former provided sustainable motivation connected to values beyond the self. The latter created hollowness that increased power only amplified. Becoming strong to protect people meant strength served something larger. Becoming strong to hurt people meant strength served only pain. Granolah's evolution from revenge to protection by the arc's end, choosing not to kill Gas and defending planet Cereal, suggested potential for redemption or at least redirection. He gained power through unhealthy means but might still use it for better purposes moving forward. This possibility offered hope without erasing consequences. Granolah still had only 3 years to live, still carried trauma, still faced uncertain future. But he wasn't locked into the revenge path that had consumed him. Change remained possible even amid tragedy. The arc's refusal to provide easy resolution to Granolah's psychological state felt honest in ways Dragon Ball usually avoided. Happy endings were possible but not guaranteed or immediate. Healing would take time Granolah might not have, and that was simply how things were sometimes. This mature approach to trauma and recovery elevated the Granolah arc above typical shonen action stories. It trusted readers to handle ambiguity and incomplete closure, to understand that some stories didn't end neatly, that growth was an ongoing process, not destination. The broader implications for Universe 7's power scaling were significant. If wishes could create warriors stronger than gods, what did that mean for cosmic hierarchy? Could anyone with Dragon Ball access theoretically surpass even angels or Xeno? The arc suggested limits to wish-granted power through the in-the-universe wording that excluded angels and gods. This preserved some hierarchy while acknowledging that within the mortal realm, essentially anyone could become strongest, given the right wish. This democratization of power created narrative instability. Future antagonists could potentially use similar methods, making each new threat require new explanations for how they achieved universe-threatening strength. This risked repetitiveness, though it also opened possibilities for exploring different shortcut methods and their various consequences. The introduction of dimensional training spaces as alternative method provided one such possibility. Perhaps future stories would explore time manipulation, ancient techniques, forbidden transformations, or other paths to transcendent power beyond simple wishes. This variety would prevent the wish mechanic from becoming stale while maintaining the arc's theme that shortcuts existed but carried costs. Different methods could have different prices, creating narrative diversity in how characters achieved and paid for power. Goku and Vegeta's ongoing rivalry and training partnership remained constant amid these changes, providing stable emotional center for the story. Their relationship had evolved from pure antagonism to mutual respect to something approaching genuine friendship, though neither would likely use that word. Their different approaches to godly techniques reflected their fundamental personality differences. Goku pursued emptiness and instinct, trusting his body's wisdom over conscious thought. Vegeta embraced ego and emotion, channeling his passionate nature into destructive power. Both paths worked because they suited their practitioners. This suggested that optimal training paths were individual rather than universal, that copying someone else's method wouldn't produce identical results. Each warrior needed to discover what worked for their specific psychology and biology, rather than following prescribed formulas. The arc's subtle push toward individualization in training methods could influence future Dragon Ball stories, showing different characters developing unique techniques rather than everyone pursuing the same transformations. This would create more diverse combat styles and character expression. Granola's precision-based combat approach already demonstrated this diversity, relying on enhanced perception and accurate strikes rather than overwhelming energy output. His fighting style looked nothing like Goku's or Vegeta's, proving multiple paths to effectiveness existed. Gas's weapon creation ability similarly showcased alternative combat philosophies, emphasizing adaptability and tactical thinking. If future stories continued this pattern, Dragon Ball battles could become more varied and interesting than the standard beam struggle format. The arc's conclusion, with multiple threads left deliberately unresolved, created space for future storytelling while providing enough closure to feel satisfying. Granolah's arc wasn't complete, but it had advanced significantly. Gas was dead, but his impact rippled outward. Frieza was stronger than ever, creating ongoing tension. This balance between resolution and continuation demonstrated confident storytelling, trusting that not everything needed to wrap up neatly. Some stories were chapters in longer narratives rather than complete tales, and that was acceptable. The Granolah Arc's place in Dragon Ball Super's larger narrative remains somewhat uncertain given the manga's monthly publication and occasional hiatuses. Whether it would eventually be adapted to anime and how such adaptation might change the story were questions that remained unanswered. Anime adaptation could expand the arc significantly, adding filler content extending battles, including original scenes that developed characters further. Or it could condense elements, streamline pacing, potentially lose some of the manga's contemplative moments in favor of action. These possibilities existed only as speculation, though fans debated them extensively. The arc worked well in manga format, allowing readers to set their own pacing, lingering on panels that resonated or quickly scanning through less interesting sections. Whether anime format would enhance or diminish the story's impact depended entirely on how animators approached adaptation, what they chose to emphasize, how they handled the tonal shifts between action and character moments. The manga's visual storytelling, particularly in quieter panels, showing characters' expressions and body language, conveyed emotion that might be difficult to replicate in animated form. Some things worked better in still images than motion. Conversely, the arc's extended battle sequences could benefit from animation's dynamism, movement, and color, adding excitement that static panels couldn't quite capture. Granolah's precision shots could look spectacular with proper animation budget and choreography. The potential voice acting for Granolah, capturing his pain, rage, and rare moments of vulnerability, would significantly impact how audiences receive the character. The right performance could add depth. The wrong one could make him seem whiny or unsympathetic. Similarly, Gas's voice across his various stages, from dutiful brother to aged dying warrior, would require a versatile actor capable of conveying that transformation. His deterioration needed to be audible as well as visible to maximize emotional impact. These considerations remain theoretical unless and until anime adaptation was announced and produced. The manga version stood as definitive version for now, telling its story in its own medium's language. The arc's legacy within Dragon Ball fandom would likely remain mixed, appealing strongly to some fans while leaving others cold. Those who appreciated character depth and thematic complexity found much to value. Those who preferred straightforward action might find it slow or unnecessarily complicated. This division reflected broader tensions within Dragon Ball's fanbase about what the franchise should be. Some wanted it to evolve, to tackle more mature themes and complex characters. Others wanted it to remain true to its roots as action-adventure series focused on fights and power-ups. The Granolah Arc attempted to balance these competing desires, providing both extensive combat and psychological depth. Whether it succeeded was subjective, depending on individual preferences and what readers valued most in their Dragon Ball stories. What seemed undeniable was that the arc tried something different, taking risks that could have failed but demonstrated ambition beyond simply repeating established formulas. This willingness to experiment, even if not every experiment succeeded, kept the franchise vital. Dragon Ball had survived decades by evolving while maintaining core identity. The Granolah Arc represented one version of that evolution, exploring darker themes while retaining the series' fundamental optimism about growth and second chances. Granola's potential redemption, Goku and Vegeta's continued friendship despite rivalry, even Oil and Maki's survival suggesting possible reform. These elements preserved hope amid tragedy. The arc wasn't nihilistic despite its dark subject matter. This balance between acknowledging pain and maintaining hope felt mature in ways shonen manga often struggled to achieve. Many series either stayed relentlessly optimistic, ignoring darkness, or dove into nihilism, abandoning hope. The Granolah Arc attempted difficult middle ground. Whether future Dragon Ball stories would continue in this direction or return to simpler approaches remained uncertain. The franchise had always been somewhat inconsistent tonally, different arcs emphasizing different aspects of its identity. This flexibility was feature rather than bug, allowing Dragon Ball to appeal to broad audiences across generations. Those who'd grown up with the series and wanted more sophisticated storytelling could find it in arcs like Granolah's. Those seeking pure action entertainment could find it elsewhere. The franchise's longevity stemmed partly from this adaptability, its willingness to be different things to different people. Not every arc needed to be for everyone. Variety across the broader narrative created space for diverse preferences and moods. The technical aspects of the Granolah Arc's publication deserved consideration as well, the physical creation of manga chapters being labor-intensive process that shaped final product. Toyotaro worked with assistants on backgrounds, screen tones, and detail work, but handled character drawing and layout himself, maintaining artistic consistency. The monthly deadline meant approximately 30 days to produce 45 pages, averaging about 1.5 pages per day, though actual workflow was less linear. Some days involved only rough sketches and planning, others focused on intensive inking and finishing. The rhythm of manga creation influenced what kinds of scenes were feasible. Complex battle sequences with dozens of panels showing rapid movement required more time than dialogue-heavy scenes with larger panels and less background detail. The arc's balance between action and conversation reflected partly artistic necessity alongside narrative preference. Toyotaro's use of digital tools alongside traditional pen and ink created hybrid workflow that combined both mediums' strengths. Character line work was often done traditionally for that organic feel, while backgrounds and effects might be added digitally for efficiency and easy revision. This technical approach allowed for experimentation that pure traditional methods would have made prohibitively time-consuming. Panel layouts could be adjusted digitally, effects could be layered and tweaked, corrections could be made without redrawing entire pages. The flexibility supported more ambitious compositions. The screen tone application, those gray patterns that created shading and texture in manga, involved both physical sheets cut and applied to paper and digital patterns added in software. This created visual consistency across the arc while allowing for variation in technique based on what each scene needed. Granola's costume design, with its long coat, eye patch, and practical gear, created distinctive silhouette that remained recognizable even in small panels or dramatic lighting. This was intentional character design choice, ensuring readers could always identify him quickly amid complex action sequences. The coat's flowing design gave Toyotaro opportunities for dramatic panel compositions, the fabric's movement suggesting motion and energy beyond what static poses alone could convey. It was both aesthetic choice and practical storytelling tool. Granola's color scheme and official colored illustrations, predominantly dark reds and blacks with white accents, created visual contrast against most backgrounds while suggesting his intense, somewhat dark personality. Color choices in manga affected how characters were perceived, even when readers mostly saw black and white pages. Oatmeal's design, a sleek headpiece with glowing elements, provided science fiction visual that distinguished Granola from more fantasy-oriented Dragon Ball characters. The device's subtle glow and illustrations suggested advanced technology without overwhelming the character's overall design. The AI's interface displays, shown occasionally as holographic projections that only Granola could see, used geometric patterns and Cerealian script to suggest alien computing aesthetics. These details enriched the visual world-building even in brief appearances. Moneto's character design borrowed elements from traditional Namekian appearance while emphasizing age and frailty more than most Namekian characters. His pronounced slouch, wrinkled skin, and simpler clothing suggested someone who'd lived beyond typical Namekian lifespan. The patterns on his robe, though simple, incorporated Namekian cultural symbols mixed with Serelian influences, suggesting his long time living among Granola's people had influenced even his clothing choices. This visual storytelling communicated cultural exchange without requiring explicit explanation. Gas's visual design evolved throughout the arc more than most characters, his appearance shifting from relatively normal young man to ancient withered figure. This progression required careful management to remain recognizable while showing dramatic deterioration. His initial design featured sharp features, intense eyes, and distinctive wild hair that suggested barely contained energy. As he aged through the wish's cost, these features became exaggerated, eyes sunken, hair thinning and whitening, features becoming gaunt. The visual horror of watching Gas age was enhanced through detailed rendering of his deteriorating state. Toyotaro drew increasing amounts of wrinkles, age spots, and skeletal structure showing through thinning skin, creating visceral impact that dialogue alone couldn't achieve. This dedication to showing physical consequences of the power wish reinforced the arc's themes about costs and shortcuts. Readers could see what the rush to strength was doing to Gas, making his tragedy visible rather than merely described. Elek's design as eldest heater contrasted with Gas's intensity through controlled, calculated appearance. His neat hair, refined clothing, and composed expression suggested someone who valued control and presentation, hiding ruthlessness behind civilized veneer. The cold intelligence in Elek's eyes, rendered through Toyotaro's careful attention to subtle facial expressions, conveyed volumes about his character without requiring villainous monologues. His face showed calculation even in repose, thinking several steps ahead constantly. Oil and Maki's designs as the middle heater siblings created visual cohesion as family while distinguishing them as individuals. Both shared certain facial features with their brothers, the eye shape, bone structure, but their expressions carried more uncertainty and conflict than Elek's cold confidence or Gas's intensity. Oil's slightly worried expression in most panels suggested someone aware of family's moral compromises and uncomfortable with them. Maki's determined but conflicted expression showed similar awareness but more willingness to push forward despite doubts. These subtle distinctions added character depth. The heaters matching color schemes and official illustrations, variations on purple, black, and gold, created visual family unity while individual clothing styles reflected personalities. Alec's formal wear contrasted with Gas's combat gear and the sisters' practical outfits. Frieza's black form design represented significant departure from his previous transformations while maintaining recognizable silhouette. The dark coloration inverted his golden form's bright radiance, suggesting this was opposite evolution rather than simply next step. The form's musculature was more refined than his previous states, less bulky than first form, more controlled than final form, suggesting ultimate efficiency. Every muscle served purpose without excess, creating an impression of compressed power. The subtle purple highlights against the black base created depth in the design that pure black coloration would have lacked. These highlights caught light in interesting ways in illustrations, making Frieza's form visually dynamic despite darker tones. His tail in this form appeared slightly longer and more flexible than previous states, often curled in relaxed but ready position. This small detail suggested predatory grace, creating subtle menace through body language. Frieza's expression while in black form carried different quality than his previous emotional states. Less manic glee, less obvious cruelty, more quiet confidence of someone so far beyond opponents that emotional investment became unnecessary. The restraint made him more threatening. The dimensional training space where Frieza developed this form was shown only briefly in a single panel, depicted as white void with minimal features. This emptiness suggested pocket dimension created purely for purpose, containing nothing unnecessary, reflecting Frieza's efficiency-focused mentality. The panel showing this space was deliberately minimal, letting readers imagine the years Frieza spent there alone, training without distraction or comfort. The visual emptiness communicated psychological isolation alongside physical description. Planet Cereal's visual design throughout the arc balanced rebuilding civilization with genocide scars. The Sugarian cities appeared clean and modern, their architecture smooth and organic, but ruins dotted the landscape between settlements, reminders of what had been destroyed. These ruins, rendered in detail when plot demanded but often merely suggested in background panels, created constant visual tension. Beautiful new construction existed alongside crumbling evidence of destruction, neither fully dominating the visual landscape. The contrast was especially striking in wide shots, showing entire regions where gleaming Sugarian hives sat amid valleys still bearing blast craters from 4 decades prior. Nature had reclaimed some damaged areas, greenery growing through rubble, creating melancholy beauty. Serelian architectural fragments visible in the ruins showed different aesthetic than Sugarian building, more angular, with specific mathematical proportions that suggested their cultural focus on precision and knowledge. Even destroyed, these buildings communicated cultural values through design. Monaito's dwelling, one of few structures predating the genocide that remained intact, showed both Namekian and Cerealian design influences. The rounded doorway and organic shapes reflected Namekian aesthetics, while interior organization and certain decorative elements incorporated Cerealian patterns. This hybrid design visually represented Monaito's role as bridge between cultures, someone who'd adopted elements of Serelian civilization while maintaining Namekian identity. His home was physical manifestation of cultural exchange and preservation. The Dragon Ball's appearance in the arc, when shown being gathered, maintained traditional orange spheres with red stars, but were slightly smaller than Earth's set. This size difference, though subtle, visually distinguished them while maintaining recognizable iconography. Torombo's design, when summoned, combined traditional Eastern dragon aesthetics with unique elements suggesting ancient origin. His whiskers extended impossibly long, trailing off panel edges, suggesting size beyond what could be fully shown. His scales appeared weathered, ancient beyond measure. The dragon's eyes, rendered as deep pools without visible pupils, suggested wisdom and power operating on scale beyond mortal comprehension. Looking at those eyes, characters appeared tiny and insignificant, visual composition emphasizing the power differential. The wishing scenes, where characters stated desires to Toronbo, used dramatic lighting and panel composition to emphasize the moment's significance. Characters were often shown in shadow, illuminated only by the dragon's glow, making the wishes feel like dark bargains despite the Dragon Ball's traditional role as benevolent tools. This visual framing subtly suggested that these particular wishes were different from typical Dragon Ball usage, that Granola and Gas were asking for something that would cost them in ways standard wishes wouldn't. The art communicated this before narrative confirmed it. Goku and Vegeta's training sequences on Beerus's planet provided visual contrast to Cereal's loaded landscape. The simple rocky terrain, occasional trees, and open sky created neutral space where character expressions and movement took full focus. Whis' movements during training were rendered with particular grace, his body position suggesting impossible flexibility and control. Even in still manga panels, his poses conveyed fluidity that distinguished angelic movement from mortal effort. Beerus's cat-like mannerisms, lounging while dispensing wisdom to Vegeta, provided visual humor that balanced the arc's heavier emotional content. His casual posture while discussing profound concepts about godly power created amusing dissonance. Vegeta's ultra-ego transformation panels emphasized the form's violent nature through dynamic angles and aggressive poses. Where Goku's ultra instinct was often shown with calm-centered compositions, Vegeta's panels tilted, creating visual instability that matched the form's destructive philosophy. The purple aura surrounding Ultra Ego was rendered with sharp, angular energy patterns, unlike the smooth flowing auras of most transformations. These jagged edges suggested barely contained aggression, energy that wanted to lash out and destroy. Vegeta's facial expression while using Ultra Ego consistently showed savage grin, conveying his enjoyment of battle and pain. This disturbing pleasure was crucial character note, showing how the form tapped into Vegeta's darkest impulses while granting power. Goku's true Ultra Instinct, by contrast, was shown with serene expressions and centered compositions. His silver hair and calm face created Madonna-like imagery, suggesting transcendence rather than indulgence. The difference between the Saiyan's godly forms was thus communicated through art choices beyond just different colored auras. The visual language around each transformation reinforced their philosophical opposition. Battle choreography throughout the arc demonstrated Toyotaro's growth in depicting complex, multi-fighter combat. Panels tracked movement clearly despite multiple participants, using motion lines and sequential positioning to guide readers' eye through action. Granola's fighting style in particular required careful visual communication, since his precision-based approach differed from typical Dragon Ball beam struggles. Panels would zoom in on his eye calculating trajectories, then pull back to show the impossibly accurate shot's result. This back and forth between Granola's enhanced perception and objective reality created rhythm in action sequences, alternating between his subjective experience and external view. The technique prevented his battles from becoming repetitive despite his consistent strategy. Gas's weapon creation ability offered opportunities for varied visual design as each manifested tool had distinct appearance. Toyotaro drew everything from traditional swords to bizarre implements that defied easy categorization, keeping Gas's combat visually interesting across extended sequences. The weapon's translucent energy construction was rendered with careful attention to how they'd catch light and interact with environments. When Gas's axe crashed into ground, the impact showed both physical force and energy dispersion, communicating the weapon's dual nature. Environmental destruction during battles was depicted with appropriate scale, entire landscapes transforming as combatants clashed. Mountains crumbled, canyons formed, lakes evaporated from stray energy blasts, showing cosmic-level power's impact on physical world. These destruction sequences served narrative purpose beyond spectacle, showing that god-level battles had consequences for planets and populations. The Sugarians fleeing in terror were shown in occasional panels, reminding readers that beings lived and worked in these battlegrounds. The visual weight of showing civilian fear and displacement added moral complexity to fight scenes that might otherwise feel like pure entertainment. The arc used art to suggest that this violence, while necessary to stop gas, was still tragedy for those caught in crossfire. Monaito's healing scenes were rendered with soft, glowing effects around his hands, contrasting with the harsh energy of combat. These gentle moments provided visual breathing room between intense action sequences. The Namekian's expressions while healing, showing concentration mixed with compassion, communicated his nature wordlessly. His care for those he healed was visible in how Toyotaro drew his face, adding emotional depth to what could have been purely mechanical plot device. The final confrontation with Frieza used stark compositions, emphasizing the tyrant's overwhelming presence. He was often shown from low angles, looming over other characters, or centered in panels with vast empty space around him, suggesting isolation at the peak of power. When Frieza defeated Goku and Vegeta with single blows, the panels used dramatic impact effects and the Saiyans' shocked expressions to convey how completely outmatched they were. These weren't close fights. The art made Frieza's superiority unmistakable. The scene of Frieza crushing Elek's skull was rendered with appropriate brutality while avoiding excessive gore. The focus was on Elek's final expression of fear and realization, with the actual violence suggested rather than graphically depicted. This restraint in showing violence made moments of explicit harm more impactful when they occurred. The manga rated for younger audiences couldn't show everything, but suggested horrors were often more effective than detailed depiction anyway. Gas's death scene was handled with similar approach, showing his aged, deteriorating body collapsing but focusing more on emotional devastation than physical detail. His final expression mixed relief with regret, suggesting complex feelings about reaching his end. The panel composition during his death, with Gas small in the frame surrounded by vast empty space, visually represented his isolation and the meaninglessness of his sacrifice. He died alone despite family's presence, the art communicating his fundamental loneliness. Whis' intervention to save Monaito was shown with characteristic angel aesthetic, bright clean light and simple elegant gesture rather than dramatic energy effects. The visual simplicity suggested power so far beyond mortal understanding that it didn't need flashy display. Monaito's restoration showed him literally glowing with renewed vitality, the light fading to reveal him looking decades younger temporarily. The visual transformation conveyed Miracle's magnitude without requiring lengthy explanation. The final pages showing Granola and Monaito amid Planet Cereal's landscape used quieter compositions after the battle's chaos. Simple panels of them standing together looking at horizon suggested contemplation and uncertain future without spelling everything out textually. These closing images worked because they created space for reader interpretation, showing characters at moment of transition without declaring what would come next. The visual storytelling trusted readers to understand emotional beats. Throughout the arc, Toyotaro's panel layouts grew more sophisticated, using unusual shapes and borderless panels to create specific effects. Action sequences might break panel borders to suggest movement exceeding containment, while quiet moments used traditional rectangles for stability. This conscious deployment of different panel techniques demonstrated mature understanding of manga's visual grammar, using form to reinforce content. The arc's visual storytelling operated on multiple levels simultaneously. The page compositions often used symmetry or deliberate asymmetry to create visual tension or harmony as scenes demanded. A confrontation might split the page vertically with opponents on each side, while a character's internal struggle might show fragmented panels, suggesting psychological fracture. These sophisticated techniques elevated the arc beyond simple fight sequences and dialogue, making it work as visual narrative that rewarded close reading. Each page contained choices that enhanced storytelling. The arc's use of establishing shots to ground readers in locations prevented common problem in action manga, where fights became abstracted from physical space. Regular wide panels showed where characters were in relation to surroundings, maintaining spatial coherence. This attention to geography helped readers understand tactics and movement, why characters position themselves certain ways, what environmental features they might use. The battles had strategy visible in layouts, not just power levels colliding. Backgrounds throughout maintained appropriate detail level for each scene's needs. Important dialogue moments might have simpler or no backgrounds to focus attention on character expressions. Action scenes featured detailed environments that made impacts and destruction feel consequent. This variable approach to background detail created visual rhythm across pages and chapters, preventing monotony while ensuring nothing felt incomplete. Each panel received appropriate level of finish for its narrative purpose. Character expressions crucial for conveying emotion in any visual medium showed particular nuance in quieter character moments. Granola's micro-expressions when discussing his trauma, Gas's subtle fear beneath obedient compliance, Vegeta's complicated feelings about his race's history, all were visible to attentive readers. These subtle emotional communications required skill to draw consistently across multiple chapters and months of publication. Toyotaro maintained character emotional continuity impressively well given the production demands. The arc occasionally used visual callbacks to earlier Dragon Ball moments, placing characters in compositions that echoed classic scenes. This wasn't simple nostalgia, but deliberate thematic connection, showing how current events related to franchise history. When Goku received Bardock's Scouter, a panel showed him holding it that deliberately evoked images of Bardock from decades of Dragon Ball history. The visual parallel connected father and son across time without needing textual explanation. Similarly, Frieza's arrival echoed his first appearance on Namek in panel composition, reminding readers of his history while showing how much had changed. The callback highlighted both continuity and evolution. These visual references rewarded longtime fans while remaining accessible to newer readers, operating as subtle enrichment rather than necessary comprehension. The story worked without noticing them, but gained depth through recognition. The color illustrations that accompanied chapter releases, used for promotional purposes and later compiled in volume releases, provided official depiction of character designs in full color. These established canonical appearance that black and white manga could only suggest. Granola's official colors showed deep red hair, pale skin suggesting life lived mostly indoors or at night, and golden cybernetic eye visible when his patch was displaced. The color scheme was striking without being garish, fitting his role as serious protagonist. Gas's colors shifted across different illustrations as his aging progressed, starting with dark hair and healthy skin tone, ending with white hair and ashen complexion. This visual progression reinforced his deterioration's horror. The Cerealian ruins in colored illustrations showed weathered stone and metal in muted earth tones, suggesting age and abandonment. Vegetation growing through cracks added touches of green that suggested nature's reclamation, but also life's persistence. These color choices created melancholy beauty that enhanced the arc's themes about loss and memory. The ruins weren't just destroyed, they were being slowly erased by time, making preservation efforts feel urgent. Beerus's planet in color maintained its iconic purple palette, the alien sky creating otherworldly atmosphere that distinguished godly realm from mortal spaces. The consistent color scheme helped readers instantly recognize setting changes. The visual contrast between Serial's earth tones and Beerus' planet's purples created subconscious association between different thematic elements, trauma and history versus transcendence and growth. Color psychology worked beneath conscious narrative. Frieza's black form in colored illustrations showed purple-black primary coloring with purple highlights, creating sophisticated dark palette that suggested refined power. The coloring choices made him visually distinct from any previous appearance. The color illustrations composition often placed characters against dramatically lit backgrounds or in action poses that couldn't be sustained in manga's sequential storytelling. These served different purpose, grabbing attention and conveying essence rather than telling story beat by beat. Together, the black and white manga pages and occasional color illustrations created complete visual package that worked in different ways. The manga prioritized narrative flow and sequential art, while color pieces emphasized iconic moments and character designs. This dual approach let Toyotaro showcase different skills, sequential storytelling versus single image impact. Both were important for modern manga, which existed in physical volumes but also as digital promotion and merchandise design. The arc's visual identity, considered as totality across all its illustrations, created cohesive aesthetic that was recognizably Dragon Ball while having its own character. Future readers encountering the Granolah Arc would recognize its visual signature immediately. This distinctiveness came from conscious choices about panel layout, character design, action choreography, and emotional beats. The arc looked like itself, not just generic Dragon Ball, which helped it stand out in franchise history. The production values maintained consistency across the arc's nearly 3-year realization, never showing obvious signs of deadline rush or quality drop-off. This testified to Toyotaro's professionalism and his team's efficiency. Of course, some chapters showed tighter art than others, inevitable across extended production, but baseline quality remained high throughout. Readers could trust that picking up new chapter would deliver visually satisfying experience. The special care given to significant moments, First Wish, major transformations, Frieza's arrival, showed understanding of what readers would remember and discuss. These sequences received extra attention to detail and dramatic presentation. This hierarchy of effort, focusing energy where it would have maximum impact while maintaining competence everywhere else, reflected mature approach to commercial art production. Perfect wasn't possible under monthly deadlines, but strategic excellence was. The page count consistency, maintaining approximately 45 pages per chapter with occasional variations, created predictable reading experience. Readers knew roughly how long each chapter would take, making the monthly releases feel substantial rather than brief teasers. This generous page allotment compared to weekly manga allowed for better pacing and less compressed storytelling. Scenes could breathe, character moments could develop naturally without constant pressure to accelerate toward action beats. The chapter break placements generally followed sound dramatic instincts, ending on cliffhangers or significant revelations that made readers eager for next installment. These breaks were important for serialized experience, even if less relevant in collected volume format. Some chapters ended on quieter notes, reflective moments rather than dramatic hooks, showing confidence that narrative momentum would carry readers forward regardless. Not every chapter needed explosive ending. The volume compilation of these chapters, reorganizing them into collected books, created different reading rhythm than monthly serialization. Binge reading multiple chapters revealed patterns and parallels that might be less obvious when chapters arrived weeks apart. This dual existence, as serialized monthly release and collected volumes, meant the arc was experienced differently by different readers. Those following monthly lived with the story for years, while volume readers might complete it in days. Neither experience was superior, just different, creating multiple valid relationships to the same material. The arc accommodated both through strong individual chapters that also worked as larger whole. The merchandise and promotional materials generated around the arc, including figures, apparel, and promotional art, extended its visual presence beyond manga pages. Granola appeared on posters and advertisements, becoming part of Dragon Ball's commercial ecosystem. This commercial aspect, while sometimes dismissed by purists, was integral to modern manga's existence. Successful series generated merchandise that funded continued production, creating symbiotic relationship between art and commerce. Granola's design was well suited for merchandise, his distinctive silhouette and costume making for striking figure designs. The eye patch alone became iconic visual marker, immediately identifying him even in stylized or simplified renderings. Gas's various forms across his deterioration created multiple design possibilities, from his initial appearance to his ultimate withered state. Merchandise could depict different stages, each telling part of his story visually. Frieza's black form immediately entered Dragon Ball's transformation pantheon, likely to appear in video games, card games, and other media for years. The design's strength ensured it would outlast the arc that introduced it. This cultural permanence, where designs transcended their original narrative context to become iconic on their own, represented success for character design and visual storytelling. The arc created images that would persist. The fan art community's response to the arc provided interesting mirror to official art, showing what visual elements resonated most strongly. Artists drew Granola extensively, suggesting his design and character connected with creative community. Many fan interpretations explored moments only briefly shown in manga, expanding visual storytelling into areas Toyotaro hadn't focused on. This creative dialogue between official and fan work enriched the arc's visual culture. Some fan artists experimented with alternate color schemes, different costume variations, or imagined moments beyond the story scope. This transformative creativity showed audience engagement beyond passive consumption. The arc's visual legacy would include both Toyotaro's official art and this ecosystem of fan creativity, together forming complete cultural object. The manga was starting point for ongoing visual conversation. Video game adaptations of the arc, whether eventual or hypothetical, would face interesting challenges in translating manga's visual storytelling to three-dimensional interactive medium. The games would need to capture arc's emotional weight while providing engaging gameplay. Granola's precision-based combat style could translate interestingly to game mechanics, perhaps as aiming system or weak point targeting. His fighting style offered gameplay possibilities distinct from standard Dragon Ball combat. Gas's weapon creation abilities similarly suggested unique gameplay mechanics, perhaps letting players switch between different weapon types mid-combat. The variety could keep his fights feeling fresh across extended play sessions. The dimensional training space where Frieza trained might appear as game location, though its visual emptiness would need enrichment for interesting gameplay environment. Developers would have to balance canonical accuracy with player engagement. These adaptation questions, while speculative, demonstrated how the arc's visual and narrative elements would need thoughtful handling in different media. What worked in manga required translation rather than direct transfer. The arc's influence on Dragon Ball's visual language extended beyond its own boundaries, potentially affecting how future stories depicted trauma, aging, and consequence. It established visual vocabulary for showing cost and sacrifice that might inform later work. Toyotaro's growing confidence in depicting nuanced expressions and body language raised the bar for Dragon Ball Super's character work going forward. Future arcs would need to maintain or exceed this standard for emotional communication. The architectural and environmental design work establishing Planet Cereal's visual identity created a template for depicting civilizations with complex histories. Other locations might use similar approaches, showing layers of history through physical space. These influences might not be immediately obvious, operating more as gradual evolution of franchise's visual storytelling capacity. The Granolah Arc contributed to Dragon Ball's artistic maturation in ways that would compound over time. Looking at the arc's art in totality revealed cohesive vision executed across hundreds of pages and nearly 3 years of work. The visual storytelling maintained quality and coherence impressively well given the challenges involved. This achievement deserved recognition alongside narrative analysis, as manga was inherently visual medium where art carried equal weight to text. Understanding the Granolah Arc completely required engaging with Toyotaro's drawings, not just plot summary. The narrative pacing across the arc's 14 chapters created deliberate rhythm that alternated between explosive action and contemplative character work. This wasn't accidental, but reflected conscious structural choices about how to sustain reader engagement across extended serialization. Early chapters established Granola's character and motivation quickly, spending minimal time on exposition before propelling him toward the wish. This front-loaded momentum hooked readers immediately, creating investment before slowing down for deeper exploration. The middle chapters, where Goku and Vegeta arrived and battles began, provided the action spectacle Dragon Ball fans expected while weaving in flashbacks and revelations about the past. This balanced immediate entertainment with long-term narrative development. Later chapters shifted focus more toward character psychology and thematic exploration, trusting that readers were sufficiently invested to follow even when action slowed. The pacing earned this shift through earlier engagement. The final chapters accelerated again with Frieza's arrival, providing climactic confrontation while leaving threads unresolved for future stories. This created satisfying local conclusion within larger, ongoing narrative. This structural approach, hook quickly, develop gradually, accelerate periodically, end with new questions, reflected understanding of serialized storytelling's demands. Each chapter needed its own appeal while serving larger arc. The dialogue throughout maintained Dragon Ball's characteristic directness, characters saying what they meant without excessive circumlocution. This suited the franchise's action-adventure roots while allowing for emotional honesty in dramatic moments. Granola's conversations with Monaito, where the Namekian gently challenged his revenge obsession, demonstrated how simple language could convey complex emotional dynamics. Neither character spoke in elaborate metaphors, yet their exchanges carried significant weight. Similarly, Gas's brief moments questioning his path, quickly suppressed by Elek's manipulation, were rendered in straightforward language that made the power dynamic clear. The simplicity made the abuse more visible rather than obscuring it. Goku and Vegeta's banter during training and battle maintained their established character voices while showing growth. Vegeta's pride remained but manifested differently than in his villainous days. Goku's enthusiasm for fighting was tempered with awareness of consequences. Frieza's dialogue in his brief appearance carried particular menace through restraint. Unlike his earlier incarnation's theatrical villain speeches, Black Frieza spoke economically, every word calculated for effect. This evolution in his character voice suggested maturity alongside power growth. The exposition about wish mechanics, dimensional training, and Saiyan history was integrated into conversations rather than dumped through narration. Characters discovered information organically, making reveals feel natural rather than forced. Oatmeal's role as information provider allowed for technical explanations without breaking dialogue flow. The AI could analyze situations and provide data in ways that felt justified by its nature as computer system. The flashback sequences to Bardock's time on Serial were handled through visual storytelling primarily, with minimal dialogue. The images of genocide and Bardock's conflicted choices spoke more powerfully than extensive explanation could. This visual approach to flashbacks prevented them from feeling like interruptions to present action. They functioned as quick glimpses that added context without stalling momentum. The balance between showing and telling varied appropriately across the arc. Action was shown, internal states were sometimes told through dialogue or thought bubbles, background information came through conversation. Each method was deployed where it worked best. Thought bubbles, used sparingly in modern manga compared to earlier eras, appeared occasionally to convey internal conflict characters couldn't voice. Gas's doubts, Granola's pain, Vegeta's reflections, these benefited from direct access to thoughts. However, the arc relied more on expression and body language to convey emotion, trusting visual medium's capacity for showing rather than telling. This created more engaging reading experience than constant internal monologue. The narrative voice, when narration boxes appeared, maintained neutral observational tone rather than omniscient commentary. The boxes provided necessary information, time passing, location changes, without editorializing about events. This restraint in narration let readers form their own interpretations of characters' actions and motivations. The story presented events and let readers judge rather than instructing them how to feel. The thematic consistency across the arc's extended serialization demonstrated careful planning or at least strong editorial oversight. The questions about revenge, power, legacy, and healing remained central throughout rather than getting lost amid plot developments. Every major plot point connected back to these core themes. Granola's wish was about revenge and power. Gas's transformation explored similar territory from different angles. Frieza's arrival demonstrated ultimate expression of power seeking. Even smaller moments supported thematic framework. Moneto's healing represented alternative to destructive approaches. Goku and Vegeta's training showed healthy versus unhealthy relationships with strength. Boyle and Maki's complicity explored degrees of guilt. This thematic coherence created satisfying unity across chapters that could have felt disconnected given the monthly publication schedule. The arc was clearly about specific ideas rather than just series of events. The philosophical questions raised about justice and revenge were complicated rather than simplified. The arc didn't declare revenge always wrong or power inherently corrupting, but explored how specific choices in specific contexts led to specific outcomes. Granola's revenge was understandable but self-destructive. The arc validated his pain while questioning his methods. This nuanced approach respected character complexity rather than reducing him to simple moral lesson. Similarly, the exploration of the Saiyans' historical atrocities acknowledged real harm without condemning Goku and Vegeta for ancestors' sins. The arc distinguished between individual and collective responsibility thoughtfully. The treatment of family dynamics through both Granola Monito and the Heaters examined how relationships could heal or harm. Family wasn't automatically good or bad, but depended on how members treated each other. These mature thematic explorations elevated the arc beyond typical shonen action fare. The story trusted readers to engage with moral ambiguity rather than needing clear heroes and villains. Of course, Frieza remained clearly villainous, providing moral anchor for readers who wanted someone to root against. But even he was rendered with enough competence and success to be compelling antagonist, rather than punching bag. The arc's relationship to broader Dragon Ball continuity was carefully managed, respecting established lore while adding new elements. References to previous arcs created sense of ongoing history without requiring extensive knowledge. New readers could follow the Granolah Arc story without having watched all of Dragon Ball Z or read previous super chapters. The necessary context was provided efficiently within the narrative. However, longtime fans found numerous callbacks and connections that enriched their experience. Bardock's role, Frieza's development, references to the Tournament of Power. These rewarded franchise knowledge. This dual accessibility, working for both newcomers and veterans, reflected Dragon Ball's commercial realities as mass-market entertainment. The franchise needed to welcome new audiences while satisfying existing fanbase. The arc's place in Dragon Ball Super's timeline, occurring after the Morrow arc and before whatever would come next, created interesting positions. It had to follow up one major threat while setting up future conflicts. The solution of introducing Granola and the Heaters as new players while bringing back Frieza as upgraded threat accomplished both goals. Fresh characters provided novelty. Frieza's return offered familiar anchor. This balance of new and familiar would be crucial for Dragon Ball's continued success. Pure nostalgia would stagnate, pure novelty would alienate, but mixing both could satisfy diverse audience segments. The arc's reception among fans and critics reflected this mixed approach. Some praised the character depth and thematic ambition, others criticized pacing or felt it retreaded familiar territory. Both perspectives had merit. Dragon Ball at this point in its history carried enormous expectations and baggage. Any new story would be compared to decades of previous material, making it nearly impossible to satisfy everyone. The Granolah Arc's willingness to attempt something somewhat different despite these pressures showed creative ambition that deserved respect regardless of execution debates. Trying and partially succeeding was preferable to safe repetition. The arc's exploration of Saiyan history added depth to the franchise's world building, showing consequences of their warrior culture that earlier stories had glossed over. This revisionist approach to established lore was potentially controversial. Some fans appreciated seeing the Saiyans' darker history acknowledged more explicitly. Others felt it retroactively darkened the franchise's tone in ways that conflicted with its escapist entertainment roots. This tension between mature storytelling and traditional Dragon Ball fun was perhaps the arc's central challenge. It attempted to do both simultaneously, which inevitably satisfied neither camp completely. The compromise resulted in an arc that was more thoughtful than most Dragon Ball, but less dark than it might have been if fully committed to exploring genocide and trauma. The tonal balancing act was imperfect but interesting. Future Dragon Ball stories would likely continue negotiating this balance, trying to grow with aging fanbase while remaining accessible to new younger readers. There was no perfect solution, only ongoing adaptation. The Granolah Arc's commercial performance in terms of volume sales and reader engagement would influence these future decisions. If it sold well, more character-focused arcs might follow. If not, return to simpler approaches might occur. These market forces shaped manga production as much as creative vision. Toyotaro and his editors had to balance artistic ambitions with commercial viability, creating stories that worked as both art and product. The arc's length at 14 chapters was substantial but not excessive by Dragon Ball standards. It told complete story without overstaying its welcome, though some felt it could have been condensed, others wanted more development. This disagreement about ideal length reflected different reading preferences. Some readers wanted lean, efficient storytelling, others preferred languorous exploration. The arc split this difference with mixed results. The chapter count allowed for significant character development and thematic exploration while maintaining narrative momentum. A shorter arc might have felt rushed, a longer one potentially tedious. The decision about when to end the arc, with Frieza's departure and Granola's uncertain future, left readers wanting more while providing local resolution. This was likely intentional, maintaining interest for future stories. Cliffhanger endings that resolved nothing might frustrate, while complete closure would reduce anticipation for what came next. The arc's ending struck reasonable balance between these extremes. The unanswered questions about Granola's remaining years, Oil and Maki's fate, and Frieza's plans created hooks for potential return to these characters and plot threads. Whether future stories would capitalize on these hooks remained to be seen. Dragon Ball's history included many characters introduced and then largely forgotten, suggesting no guarantee of follow-up. But the investment in Granolah and the Heaters suggested intention to revisit them eventually. The arc's themes about legacy and memory took on metatextual dimension when considering Dragon Ball itself as decades-old franchise. What would it mean to preserve this cultural artifact for future generations while allowing it to evolve? The series faced choice between becoming a museum piece, endlessly recycling greatest hits, or a living franchise that grew and changed. The Granolah Arc represented an attempt at the latter approach. Whether this evolution would ultimately strengthen or dilute Dragon Ball's identity was a question only time could answer. The franchise's continued popularity suggested room for experimentation within established framework. The international reception of the arc across different languages and cultures added another layer of complexity. Dragon Ball's global fanbase meant the story needed to work across cultural contexts. The themes of genocide, revenge, and family trauma were unfortunately universal, giving the arc broad resonance. The specific details might be fantasy, but emotional cores were recognizable across cultures. This universality helped explain Dragon Ball's international success beyond just action spectacle. The stories at their best touched on human experiences that transcended specific cultural contexts. The translation challenges in bringing the arc to English and other languages involved more than just literal word conversion. Tone, cultural references, and character voices all needed careful handling. The translator's choices about how to render Granolah's speech patterns, Frieza's menace, and emotional beats affected how non-Japanese readers experienced the story. Translation was interpretation, not mere transcription. These international versions of the arc existed as distinct texts in some ways, similar in plot but different in exact word choice and connotation. The arc thus lived in multiple linguistic forms simultaneously. The manga format's advantages for international distribution, relatively low localization costs compared to anime, faster release schedules, meant global audiences accessed the Granolah Arc nearly simultaneously with Japanese readers. This near-simultaneous global release created international fan community that discussed chapters as they appeared, sharing reactions across language barriers. The arc became a cultural event beyond just Japanese entertainment. Social media amplified this global conversation, with fans posting reactions, theories, and analysis in real time. The arc was experienced communally, even by readers who consumed the manga alone. This participatory culture around the arc's release added dimension to the reading experience that studying the manga years later wouldn't capture. The arc existed in specific cultural moment, with particular fan conversations. The fan theories about where the story would go, most ultimately proven wrong, were part of that moment's texture. The speculation and debate were experiences unto themselves beyond whether predictions were accurate. Some fans theorized Granolah would die by Arc's end. Others expected him to become permanent ally. The actual ambiguous ending satisfied neither prediction perfectly, which was perhaps point. The surprise of Frieza's enhanced form and easy victory over Goku and Vegeta generated significant reaction when that chapter released. Many fans hadn't anticipated this development, making it genuine shock. These surprising moments created shared cultural experiences for readers, memories of encountering unexpected developments together. The monthly serialization format enhanced these communal reactions by creating discrete events to respond to. Binge readers encountering the arc years later wouldn't have those same experiences, instead consuming it in single sitting or across few days. Their relationship to the material would be different, but no less valid. This multiplicity of reading experiences, monthly serialization versus volume collection versus digital binge, meant the Granolah arc existed as different objects for different audiences. There was no single definitive way to experience it. The arc's availability across multiple formats and platforms further diversified how audiences accessed it. Physical manga volumes, digital subscriptions, library borrowing, unofficial scanlations, each created slightly different reading context. These various access points raised questions about manga ownership and consumption in digital age. What did it mean to own the arc? Physical volumes? Digital licenses? Just having read it, these questions extended beyond the specific arc to manga and comics generally, as industry grappled with transitioning from purely physical to hybrid physical-digital distribution. The Granolah arc's role in this transitioning media landscape was modest but real. It was among the Dragon Ball Super chapters released during period of accelerating digital adoption. The COVID-19 pandemic, occurring during the arc's serialization, affected manga industry and how readers accessed content. Physical retail faced challenges while digital platforms grew. Whether the arc's reception was influenced by these external factors, people having more time to read during lockdowns, or less disposable income for physical volumes, was difficult to determine but worth considering. The arc existed in specific historical moment, created during particular circumstances that shaped its creation and reception in ways both obvious and subtle. Understanding it completely required acknowledging this context. The creator's working conditions during pandemic, whether Toyotaro faced delays or challenges in production, weren't publicly documented in detail, but likely affected the work somehow. These material conditions of manga production, often invisible to readers, fundamentally shaped what was possible. Art was created by human beings working under specific constraints, not manifested from pure creative inspiration. Acknowledging this didn't diminish the arc's artistic achievements, but grounded them in reality of commercial art production. The manga was both creative work and product made under deadline for profit. This dual nature as art and commodity created tensions but also possibilities. Commercial success funded continued creation, while artistic ambition distinguished the work in crowded marketplace. The Granolah Arc navigated these tensions with mixed success, attempting meaningful character work within franchise entertainment framework. It was neither purely commercial nor purely artistic, but hybrid of both. This hybrid nature characterized most successful manga, balancing creative vision with market demands. Pure art manga existed but rarely achieved Dragon Ball's cultural impact or commercial success. The arc's legacy would ultimately be determined by how it influenced subsequent Dragon Ball stories and whether it remained memorable years later. Some arcs became franchise touchstones, others faded into obscurity despite contemporary success. Early indications suggested the Granolah Arc would be remembered, if perhaps not celebrated as unambiguous classic. It tried things, succeeded partially, left impression. That was achievement in itself. The characters introduced, Granola, Gas, the Heaters, would likely appear in Dragon Ball video games and other media going forward, ensuring some continued presence in franchise ecosystem. Frieza's black form was almost certain to become standard option in future games, cementing the arc's contribution to Dragon Ball's transformation catalog. These commercial afterlives would keep the arc visible even to people who never read the original manga, spreading its elements throughout Dragon Ball's multimedia presence. The arc's influence on franchise direction, whether it represented new template for Dragon Ball storytelling or aberration from established patterns, would become clearer as more super chapters released. If subsequent arcs continued exploring trauma and moral complexity, the Granolah arc would be seen as turning point. If they returned to simpler approaches, it might be viewed as interesting experiment that franchise moved past. Either way, it represented moment when Dragon Ball attempted something slightly different, and that attempt was worth examining regardless of ultimate verdict on its success. The conversations the arc generated about what Dragon Ball could or should be were valuable independent of whether the arc itself perfectly executed its vision. It pushed boundaries and prompted reflection. These meta-discussions about franchise identity and evolution were signs of engaged fanbase that cared deeply about Dragon Ball's future. The passion in both praise and criticism demonstrated continued investment. Dragon Ball's ability to generate such passionate discussion decades after its creation testified to its cultural significance. The franchise mattered to people in ways that transcended simple entertainment. The Granolah arc became part of that larger cultural conversation, adding new elements to ongoing dialogue about Dragon Ball's meaning and value. It was one chapter in much longer story. The educational aspects of the arc, while not its primary purpose, offered opportunities for reflection on real historical patterns. The depiction of genocide, collaborators, and generational trauma paralleled actual historical events in ways that could prompt thought. Obviously, Dragon Ball was fiction featuring aliens and energy blasts, not documentary about real atrocities. But the emotional patterns it explored, survivor guilt, the impossibility of revenge filling voids loss created, cycles of violence, resonated with actual human experiences. Educators using popular media to engage students with difficult historical topics might find the arc's treatment of these themes useful as entry point for discussion. The fantasy distance made approaching painful subjects less raw while maintaining emotional authenticity. Of course, using entertainment for educational purposes required care and context. The arc shouldn't replace actual historical education, but might supplement it by making abstract concepts emotionally concrete. The way Granola's trauma manifested his struggle to process loss could help readers understand trauma's psychological impacts in ways that clinical descriptions might not convey as effectively. Similarly, the depiction of Alex's manipulation and Gas's tragic compliance illustrated abusive relationship dynamics that some readers might recognize from their own experiences, potentially prompting reflection or seeking help. These potential applications beyond pure entertainment didn't make the arc inherently better or worse, but demonstrated how popular media could serve multiple functions simultaneously. The arc's accessibility, being part of widely known franchise, meant it might reach audiences who wouldn't seek out more explicit explorations of these themes. Its commercial nature was feature, not bug, for these potential applications. The philosophical questions the arc raised about identity, purpose, and moral responsibility extended beyond its specific narrative. Readers could extract broader lessons about approaching life's challenges and relating to others. Granola's journey suggested that defining yourself purely through trauma or revenge led to emptiness, that healing required finding meaning beyond pain. This wasn't revolutionary insight, but expressing it through compelling story made it resonate. Vegeta's ongoing wrestling with his violent past demonstrated that redemption was process, not destination, requiring constant choice and effort. His character arc across all of Dragon Ball illustrated this theme that the Granolah arc continued. The distinction between earned growth through sustained effort versus shortcuts remained central to Dragon Ball's philosophy across all its incarnations. The franchise consistently valued training and struggle over easy power gains. The Granolah arc reinforced this through Granolah's and Gas's tragic wish-granted power contrasted with Goku and Vegeta's training-based development. The message was clear, even if not always perfectly executed. This thematic consistency across decades of storytelling was part of Dragon Ball's enduring appeal. The franchise stood for something: hard work, friendship, redemption, growth, even as specific stories varied in quality. The Granolah arc's alignment with these core values while attempting to explore them more maturely showed respect for franchise history while pushing toward evolution. It honored tradition while seeking innovation. The balancing act between respect and innovation defined Dragon Ball Super's entire existence. The series had to be recognizable as Dragon Ball while justifying its existence beyond nostalgia for Dragon Ball Z. The Granolah arc's mixed reception suggested this balance remained difficult to achieve perfectly, but the attempt was necessary for franchise vitality, even if results were sometimes uneven. The conversations about what worked and what didn't in the arc were valuable feedback for future stories, helping creators and audience collectively refine understanding of what made Dragon Ball meaningful. This collaborative relationship between creators and audience, mediated through official and unofficial channels, shaped franchise direction more than top-down creative vision alone could. Fan feedback, while not always consistent or actionable, provided data points about what resonated and what fell flat. Smart creators used this information without being enslaved to it. The Granolah arc's development likely incorporated some learnings from earlier Dragon Ball Super arc's reception, attempting to address criticisms about pacing or character depth. Whether it succeeded was debatable, but the effort to improve and respond to audience while maintaining creative vision demonstrated healthy approach to long-running franchise management. The economic realities underpinning Dragon Ball's continued existence, merchandise sales, licensing deals, anime rights, meant the franchise needed to maintain commercial viability to continue at all. The Granolah arc contributed to this through generating content that kept Dragon Ball relevant and discussed. Even criticism kept the franchise in cultural conversation, which had commercial value. This might seem cynical, but acknowledging commercial dimensions didn't negate artistic merit. The arc could simultaneously be art and product, sincere expression and marketing, without contradiction. The creators working on Dragon Ball likely cared about both making good stories and commercial success. These goals aligned more often than they conflicted, as good stories generally sold better than bad ones. The arc's attempt to tell meaningful character-driven story within commercial franchise framework showed that artistic ambition could exist within commodity production. The contradiction was real but not absolute. Many beloved works across media history were commercial products made under market constraints that nevertheless achieved artistic significance. Dragon Ball itself began as commercial manga in weekly magazine. The Granolah arc was simply continuing this tradition of commercial art, attempting to create something worthwhile within entertainment industry's structural realities. The working conditions for manga creators, often involving brutal deadlines and limited rest, formed context for evaluating any manga's quality. What Toyotaro achieved while maintaining monthly schedule was impressive. The manga industry's notorious demands on creators meant that simply completing the arc at consistent quality level represented significant accomplishment before evaluating story and art's specific merits. This context didn't excuse flaws, but provided perspective on what was realistically achievable. Perfection wasn't possible under commercial manga's production demands, only different types and degrees of imperfection. The specific imperfections in the Granolah arc, occasional pacing issues, some underdeveloped side characters, certain plot threads that could have been explored more, were understandable given constraints. Imagining ideal version of the arc with unlimited time and resources was interesting thought experiment, but not fair standard for evaluation. The arc that existed was one made under real-world constraints. These constraints shaped what was possible in ways both limiting and productive. Deadlines forced decisions, word and page counts required economy, serialization demanded momentum. Each constraint influenced final form. The arc might have been different, perhaps better in some ways, with more time or different format, but it also might have lost urgency or focus that constraints provided. The relationship between constraint and creativity was complex, restrictions sometimes enhancing work by forcing cleverness and efficiency. Too much freedom could lead to formlessness. The Granolah arc existed in sweet spot of having some creative freedom within Dragon Ball framework while facing enough constraints to maintain structure and direction. This balance between freedom and constraint, experimentation and tradition, innovation and formula characterized the arc at every level from individual page composition to overall narrative structure. The results were messy, uneven, interesting, frustrating, ambitious, and flawed. In short, recognizably human creative work. The arc was neither masterpiece nor failure but something in between, which was fine. Not every story needed to be best or worst ever. Most creative work occupied middle ground of partial successes and failures, interesting attempts that achieved some goals while missing others. The Granolah arc's place in that middle ground, attempting meaningful character work within franchise entertainment, made it worth examining and discussing, even if not worth uncritical celebration. The fact that people cared enough to debate the arc's merits demonstrated that it mattered to them, that Dragon Ball remained culturally significant enough to generate passionate response. That cultural significance was perhaps the arc's greatest achievement, beyond its specific narrative and artistic merits. It contributed to keeping Dragon Ball alive and relevant in contemporary culture. The franchise's longevity spanning generations of fans meant different audiences brought different perspectives and expectations to new stories like the Granolah arc. Older fans who'd grown up with original Dragon Ball or Z might appreciate more mature themes while missing simpler adventure spirit. Younger fans discovering franchise through Super might have different priorities entirely. The arc attempted to satisfy multiple audience segments simultaneously, which was perhaps an impossible task. Something for everyone often meant fully satisfying no one. But the effort to be inclusive in approach, to offer action for those who wanted spectacle and character depth for those who wanted substance, showed consideration for a diverse fan base. The compromise meant the arc wasn't perfectly optimized for any single audience segment, but attempted to provide value across different viewing preferences and engagement levels. This democratic approach to storytelling, trying to welcome many audiences rather than perfectly serving one, characterized mass-market entertainment generally and Dragon Ball specifically. The franchise's success stemmed partly from this accessibility, being enjoyable at multiple levels from simple action fun to deeper thematic exploration. The Granolah arc maintained this tradition, working as surface-level action story while offering richer material for those who wanted to engage more deeply. This multi-layered accessibility was skill in itself, crafting narratives that worked for casual and invested readers simultaneously without patronizing either group. The arc's placement within Dragon Ball Super's larger narrative remained somewhat uncertain given the manga's ongoing serialization and occasional publication breaks. Whether it would be immediately followed by a new arc, or if there would be gap was unknown at various points during its run. This uncertainty affected how readers processed the ending. If new arc started immediately, the Granolah arc would feel like one chapter in continuous story. If significant break occurred, it might feel more like self-contained narrative in its own right. The arc structure allowed for either possibility, providing local closure while maintaining hooks for future development. This flexibility reflected mature understanding of serialized storytelling's uncertainties. Manga publication schedules could change due to creator health, industry factors, or strategic decisions. Building in flexibility while maintaining narrative integrity required careful planning. The Granolah arc's conclusion worked well enough as ending point if necessary, while clearly suggesting more story to come if publication continued smoothly. This hedging against uncertainty, common in ongoing serialized media, sometimes created unsatisfying ambiguity, but was necessary given commercial manga's unpredictable nature. The eventual anime adaptation, if it happened, would face interesting challenges in pacing the arc for weekly television broadcast versus monthly manga serialization. Anime episodes typically adapted multiple manga chapters, which could either accelerate or decelerate the story depending on how much original content was added. The action sequences could be extended with additional animation, while quiet character moments might be compressed, potentially shifting the arc's tonal balance. These adaptation questions remain speculative, but illustrated how the story might transform across different media, each version creating distinct experience. The hypothetical anime soundtrack could significantly affect emotional impact of key scenes, adding dimension that silent manga panels couldn't provide. Imagine the wish-granting scenes with appropriately ominous music, or the final battle with Frieza scored for maximum impact. The audio dimension would change the experience fundamentally. Voice actor performances would add character nuance through delivery, tone, and emotion that manga's visual medium could only suggest. These potential enhancements demonstrated manga and anime's complementary strengths rather than one medium's superiority. Each offered unique possibilities for storytelling. The Granolah arc existed primarily as manga, and any evaluation had to engage with it in that form rather than imagining theoretical anime version. The manga's strengths, detailed art, reader-controlled pacing, Toyotaro's visual storytelling were inherent to the medium and should be appreciated on their own terms. Thanks for spending this time in the Dragon Ball universe with me. If you'd like to keep drifting, another video is ready on the left of your screen. Maybe let it play as you close your eyes. Sleep might find you before the next story finishes.